Rowena, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Hello, we just wanted to do an audio check.
Yes. So I believe TELUS is just merging the lines right now, and but we should be able to hear you, no problem,
Do you want
on
me
our
to
side.
come back and do another test?
I don't think that's necessary,
House said
but
he
thank you.
wants to do it, so maybe let me know when you're ready.
Sure.
Thanks.
Give us one moment. Thank
Sounds good.
you.
Thanks.
I'll let you know. Do you mind if I just send you a jabber?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Counselor, the line? Counselor Boyle, can you hear me? Rowena, are you on the line? Can you do a quick check for the TELUS line?
Hi. Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Are you able to hear me just fine? How's the volume on your end?
Sounds perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
Rosemary, Good afternoon, Council. I will call this reconvened meeting of the Standing Committee on Policy and Strategic Priorities meeting of July 23rd, 2020 to order. This meeting will be convened by electronic means as authorized under the order of the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General of the Province of British Columbia, Emergency Program Act, Ministerial Order number M192. As such, council members are participating by phone, and as chair of this meeting, I'm also participating by phone. Please note if my connection is lost during any portion of this meeting, we will recess the meeting until my connection is restored. If council loses connection during the voting process, we have staff on hand to facilitate getting you back online quickly, and we will suspend the voting process while it happens. The contact information has been circulated to you. Council is also reminded we need to ensure there is quorum during the meeting, so please make sure your video is on. The live stream of this meeting will continue with audio only, as council are participating in the meeting by phone. Presentations, amendments, and vote results will be projected to viewers when available. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, and thank them for having cared for this land, and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff who work hard every day making our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Stewart,
Present.
Councillor Carr is in the chair. Councillor DeGenova. Councillor DeGenova, are you on the line? Councillor Fry.
Present.
Councillor Swanson.
Here.
Councillor Hardwick.
Present.
Councillor Weeb. Councillor Weeb, are you on the line?
Present.
Councillor Boyle.
Present.
Councillor Dominato.
Present.
Councillor Bly is on a leave of absence for civic business. Councillor Kubiang.
Present.
You have quorum, Chair Carr.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. I would like to go over the plan for the day. Speakers should follow along on Twitter at Van City Clerk for updates on the progress of the meeting so they don't miss their turn to speak. Any comments on agenda items can be sent to Council using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be tweeted out on @Van City Clerk. We have 2 items of business remaining on the agenda, both Council members' motions. We will recess for dinner at 5 p.m. and the public hearing begins at 6 p.m. With a large number of speakers for members' motions, Council will be hearing from speakers over multiple days, and I will announce the next backup date as Friday, July 24th, 9:30 a.m.
Chair Carr,
Yes?
we have a correction on that. The reconvene date will be on July 24th at 1 p.m.
Thank you. We're reconvening in Council at 9:30, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so again, the backup date especially for the importance of all speakers is Friday, that's tomorrow, July 24th, 1 p.m. We have 2 items remaining, councillors, on the Standing Committee agenda. They were referred from Council to hear from speakers. Before we begin, I want to remind speakers that you have up to 5 minutes to make your comments, and please state whether you are in support or in opposition of the motion, and you may only speak once. Council members have up to 3 minutes to ask questions to speakers. However, speakers are under no obligation to respond. Following the last speaker on the speakers list for each item, as a pilot for the next few months, I will go over the speakers list of who were not present earlier and give them an opportunity to speak. After hearing from speakers, we will go into discussion on the motion. I would like to remind committee members that their amendments must be submitted to the clerk in final written form before the member introduces them, and please ensure that clerk has received your amendment before it is your turn to speak. Council, we have speakers who will be providing comments to Council by phone. The moderator will assist in patching those speakers through when their turn comes up. So we will now deal with item 6, Retail Revolution, bringing digital Main Street to Vancouver to support brick and mortar neighborhood small businesses, which was moved and introduced by Councillor Kirby-Young and seconded by Councillor Dominato. We will now hear speakers on this motion. Speakers will be heard via phone and in person. I think there are some. And our first speaker on this item is Catherine Cott. And if I can find out if Catherine is on the line.
Yep.
Is that you, Catherine?
Yep. Hi.
Okay, that's great. We can hear you. You have up to 5 minutes to present to council.
All right. Hi. I am a resident of Vancouver. I disapprove of this motion. I find the motion to be centering the most wealthy of the people who are business owners in Vancouver. There are a lot of poor people, a lot of immigrant families, a lot of really underprivileged people that have had to close their businesses and don't even have a business to perpetuate online. There are restaurants that have been closed for good, and they won't be receiving any support from this. So I think that this effort is it's good to be trying to support these people that are struggling in this time, but I don't think that this is a formidable way to help the most vulnerable. And I do just want to reiterate that centering the most vulnerable is the most important aspect of any role of someone in power. You should just always be trying to uplift the most vulnerable and support them. And I think that just giving them money or trying to revitalize their business, I don't think that that is as tangible as something like enacting a rent freeze. Like if they're having trouble making their brick and mortar place work because they can't make their rent, maybe tackle the issue of rent, which is an issue that's plagued the city for years with no formidable response. Still rent prices continue to increase, and I appreciate the efforts of certain councillor members to take these on, but a lot of councillor members have not faced the issue of rent that is plaguing, of course, everyone in the city, but also these small business owners that had to close their doors. So I think that instead of fixating on the people that support the economy the most or whatever, the most support should be to everyone that is suffering within this. And that's how you revitalize the economy, if that's your bottom line, is by supporting the most vulnerable and enacting things like rent freezes and rent caps and things. That's how you support not only the people in small businesses that are able to continue having a business, but also the people that have had to close their business, also the people that work, the people that have been laid off, the people that continue to have to rely on CERB. If you affect a change in rent and fixate on the problem that has been subsisting, then you'll see significant changes. Least of all, in my opinion, is economic increase, but I think that the secureness of the economy will remain if rent is lowered and the condition of the most vulnerable in society is considered. And the people that have been facing the most troubles, the people that have been struggling to pay rent and pay for food, people that are unable to go to school, all these things, people that just aren't able to pay off their loans. I think that if those are centered instead of nebulous things like a small business, I think that that's where you'll see the most substantial changes and especially the most long-lasting changes. If you actually tackle the legitimate problems that these people are facing. And all of them are facing the issue of rent. And I just think that this bill doesn't take into account the systemic issues facing these people. It's not just that they have to limit, opening up, or it's not just that these small business owners have been hit. Everyone's been hit. Everyone's been affected by this. And this bill is just a tiny Band-Aid on a large systemic issue that's affecting so many people. And I hope that the council chooses to instead focus on rights of renters, rights of tenants, rights of the most vulnerable that are struggling in light of the pandemic, and chooses accordingly to focus its efforts not on who is deemed to be the most economically viable, but who is the most vulnerable and who needs the most support. I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you came in exactly on time. But you do have questions. So, Councillor Swanson, up to 3 minutes for questioning.
Yes, thanks so much for coming. I had looked at the motion and saw that the resolution was basically just a letter to another level of government. So I thought, oh, this isn't going to hurt anything. But you made some really, really good points. So I'm wondering if you're thinking that, of course, a rent freeze or an eviction freeze for residents would be good, but would you also support a rent freeze for small businesses?
I mean, I suppose, like, I find myself thinking about all of the like restaurants. Like, I mean, just for an example, like there's so many like Thai and Vietnamese places that are owned by immigrants that are just completely closed. So I think that including small businesses in efforts to help tenants in general, I support that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for taking some time to come and tell us what you're thinking,
Yeah.
which I think is you're really thinking in the right direction.
Thanks so much.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Cott, and that's it for your questions. Thank you for coming to speak to us, be online. Our second speaker is Victoria Chen.
An email reminder was sent and a courtesy call was made, but she hasn't joined in yet.
Okay. Speaker number 3, Ji-Yun Ha.
According to my list, speaker number 3 has withdrawn. Maybe I'm wrong.
I have the next 2 withdrawn, but I'm not sure about Ji-Yun Ha. Madam City Clerk, has number 3 withdrawn?
Chair Carr, I don't have the person withdrawn, so we will check with the moderator if you would like to go on to the next speaker first.
Yes. Okay. And councillors, speakers number 4 and 5 have withdrawn. So the next speaker is Maria Hunter.
Maria Hunter hasn't joined either.
Okay. In that case, I will go back over those
Chair Carr?
speakers. Yes.
Speaker
Yes,
number 3, Ji-Yun Ha, has withdrawn.
Okay. Great. Thank you. What I'll do, as per our the trial period of repeating the list, I'm going to go over those who are on the list, not withdrawn, and see if they've joined us. That would be Victoria Chen and Maria Hunter.
No, they still have not joined.
Okay. Well, in that case, we have finished the speakers for this item. Council, thank you so much. And the motion has been moved and seconded, so we can, Council, move on to discussion. I don't. Okay. All right, Councillor Kirby-Young, up to you for up to 5 minutes for you. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but I see Councillor Boyle's on now. I was going to say I'm happy to call the question. There's no comments, but I see that there is one, so I won't because I see Councillor Boyle on. But I'll just take the opportunity to make a couple of comments and just reiterate that this is an advocacy motion request for council, and it is really in recognition of the challenge that our small businesses have had with the majority of retailers closed and only open for COVID for the last couple of months, and it's a tough go to make a go of it. 98% of our businesses in Vancouver are small business, and employing small numbers of people, but critically important to the neighborhoods and the economy across the city as a whole. And while some of them have some online literacy, many are not as proficient in that area. And this is a program that has yielded good success, Digital Main Street in Toronto and Ontario, starting up a couple of years ago. And now with leadership from Small Business BC, there's an opportunity to bring it forward here. And they have an open grant application through to the province with the endorsement of the BIA, Vancouver BIA partnership, BIA BC, and others. And so I think it's really trying to help and enable them to shift and pivot so that they can enable people to order services and conduct business online and complement in an effort to, we have regular meetings with a lot of our BIA partners to not see those empty storefronts and help folks through it. So fairly straightforward, I think, from that perspective. And I know we have a full agenda, so I will leave it there. But I think that having council's voice in support would certainly be welcomed by the proponents that are trying to bring this program forward, which I should say is typically delivered at no cost to the small businesses through the grant program and is really a skills-based program in terms of augmenting their ability to be competitive and shift in a combination of a bricks and mortar and an online environment, and particularly post-COVID. I think this has never been more important to support them in that way, and certainly fits with Council's identified priority of supporting economy and small business prior to COVID, and then with the CCRC now with a focus on economic recovery. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young. Mayor Stewart, up to 5 minutes. Mayor Stewart, you might be muted.
Sorry, my mouse just cut out there. Yes, very happy to support this motion. As I mentioned in the when this was introduced initially, I have already sent letters on these programs, but I very much welcome the full council support on this. I do feel like these are really important initiatives, and do appreciate Councillor Kirby-Young's bringing this forward. So I'll be supporting. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Stewart. Councillors, I don't see anyone else on the list to speak to this item. So if you're prepared to do this, I'll have the clerk move us to a vote. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, on point of privilege, I'll take a vote assist. It's Councillor Dominato in favor.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Dominato.
I also need a vote assist in favor.
In favor? Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you, Council, and thank you to the speakers for coming. So we will now move back to our agenda, which is moving us into our final item, which is decriminalizing, another member's motion, about decriminalizing poverty and supporting community-led safety initiatives.
Point of privilege?
Yes, Councillor DiGenova, go ahead with your point of privilege.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I have proactively consulted law on this matter, as I do, for reasons of due diligence on council matters that include the Vancouver Police Department, as I have an immediate family member who is a sworn member of the Vancouver Police Department. The advice I have been given by legal counsel is that some, although not all parts of this resolution may be considered a conflict of interest. And for this reason, and out of an abundance of caution, I will therefore recuse myself from consideration of this member motion. I also want to state in this point of privilege that it's been disheartening and very concerning to me that tactics of intimidation and not being able to make, not wanting me to make this decision on my own, but instead I've received hundreds of emails demanding, bullying, harassing, using profanity. I've received messages on social media with veiled threats, intimidation tactics, noting my Italian heritage, and a number of other things, including threats to my family, and that includes my 2-year-old child. So it's very disheartening to me, especially being a woman in politics, that this is something that I'm facing. That being said, I just want to take a moment to thank those who have reached out, especially other women, but not just women in politics, who have, along with their own families, faced the same type of misogyny, tactics, and hate that I have over this. So, with that being said, I will leave the meeting and recuse myself. Thank you very much for giving me that opportunity to share that, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor DiGenova. Okay, Council.
Madam Chair, it's Councillor Kirby-Young. I'm also on the queue for a point of privilege.
I don't see you on the queue, but you go ahead on your point of privilege.
Thank you very much. Following on Councillor DiGenova's comments, and also with respect to the motion, and after seeking, as I do always, on matters related to the Vancouver PD, and after receiving legal advice from law, I have determined I may be in a conflict of interest with respect to some specific elements on this matter, due to also having an immediate family member who is employed with the VPD, and I will therefore recuse myself from Council's consideration of this motion. I would also take the opportunity to denounce the hateful nature of the tactics that have been utilized and comment that determination of conflict of interest is the legal responsibility of an individual councillor, and tactics such as threat of legal action, bullying, intimidation, allegations of racism, particularly when my spouse is a person of color, and being called things such as a white supremacist or suggesting that my husband should kill himself, have been troublesome and inappropriate. However, I have to stay on the merits of the matters, and as law has advised me that some of these elements may be troublesome from a conflict point of view, I will recuse myself from this meeting and this matter now.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. Okay, Council. We have, this motion has been, as I say, moved already and seconded, and so we are now on to hearing from speakers on this matter. And so we are looking to hear from representatives of public bodies first, and our first speaker is Rolf Kaisers, President of the Vancouver Police Union.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Am I good to go?
You are, and we
Hello?
can hear you clearly. Yes, we can hear you clearly. Up to 5 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you. Good afternoon. And firstly, I'd like to thank Mayor and Council for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm a proud member of the Vancouver Police Department, and I've served this city for 25 years. I was born and raised in Vancouver, and I'm also a homeowner here in Vancouver. I worked in patrol for some 10 years, 5 of which was in the downtown east side. I also worked as a detective in our major crime section and then as a sergeant in the major crime section, and spent a lot of that time investigating very violent offenses that occurred in the downtown east side. I am the president of our union. I have been for over a year. I've been involved with our union for some 8-9 years now, and for a long part of that, I was also the vice president. Today, I'm calling and speaking in relation to this motion, and I am opposed to this motion, and I represent some 1,453 members of the Vancouver Police Department. With an already modest annual budget, the Vancouver Police Department has undergone 2 separate large-scale independent organizational reviews in the past some 15 years. One as recent as 2017. The reviews recommended efficiencies through reallocation of existing resources, utilizing civilian professionals, and leveraging technology and analyticals. These reviews identified that virtually all of the VPD's budget is non-discretionary after implementing all these possible internal efficiencies. The VPD has only now, in 2020, returned to the 2009 staffing levels. In contrast, during the same period of time, Vancouver's population has increased by 11%, the region's population by some 17%, and calls for service requiring VPD to attend has grown by some 14% here in Vancouver. It would be absolutely detrimental to the overall safety in the city to lose members to cutbacks. It is a huge risk now to lay people off with the creation of the Surrey Police Department. It is expected that it would be impossible to get these members back from Surrey if they went to back from Surrey if they had gone. You also have to keep in mind that recruiting, screening, training, and mentoring new officers takes a significant lead time. A $6 million budget cut, which I heard was spoken about last week, I believe it was last week, would require us to reduce our sworn officer staffing substantially, to the point that we would have fewer officers working now than we did in 2009. $6 million will equate to about 60 members, if my math is correct. Rather than addressing the service gap and public safety issue, the gap widens as calls continue to rise, as driven by residents and the business population, while the number of officers falls to grow from our 2009 levels. We have seen measurable negative results from doing more with less, rising response times to our highest priority calls for service, examples being violent crimes such as stabbing, robberies, and sex assaults, continue to decrease. We are currently 26% slower at responding to these calls than our peer Canadian police agencies. We also did a survey a couple of years ago, in relation to health and wellness, and it was shown that our members were suffering, found exhaustion rate to be in the neighborhood of, I think it was 42 or 44%. Now, in terms of this motion, and specifically there's discussion around mental health calls. We, as a police department, have been calling for change since 2007 when the Lost in Transition report was done, from partners in the mental health profession to prevent the criminalization of mentally ill people. The number of mental health apprehensions, which are people that we're encountering who is a danger to themselves or others, has remained relatively consistent over the last decade. And it's anywhere between 2,500 and 3,000 people per year. A significant change, though, has been where warrants are issued, and they're actually issued by mental health professionals who are unable to care for, locate, or help those people that they're caring for in the community, and those numbers have gone up significantly. A decade ago, we responded to almost zero of these warrants, and now we average nearly 2,000 per year. This workload is being downloaded to us from the very bodies or critics saying that we should be going to, or that this work should be going to. The reality shows that such calls are not feasible given their operational realities. We've been saying for years that officers should not have to do this work, in particular transporting mentally ill people to hospital, and then especially guarding these persons once they are at hospital, as we don't want to be a part of the health matter and should not be remaining at hospital with someone waiting for a mental health professional to deal with them. However,
Mr. Cousins, if you could just wrap it up. You're at your time, but you do have questions from councillors. But if you could just wrap it up in a few sentences, that would be good. Thank you.
That's 5 minutes. My understanding was I got 8 minutes as a person from a body or an organization.
Oh, they have to be present. Madam Clerk, could you advise? It's hard for me to know if other people are there present. Or, if you could advise on that, please.
Chair Carr, so could you repeat the question?
That he's asking for 8 minutes as a representative of an organization, but I'm questioning whether or not other members of the police union would have to be present online in order to allow that to happen. If you could advise on that.
The 8 minutes rule is applicable for public hearing only. So for council and standing committee, it's only 5 minutes.
Okay. So, Mr. Kaisers, I'm sorry, it is only 5 minutes, but you actually do have questions from councillors, so maybe you can work some of your points into the answers to those questions. And,
okay, thanks.
You've got more than one councillor asking you questions. Thank you. And Councillor Hardwick, you're first.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm interested what the impact of all of this must be on morale among your union membership.
Well, it has certainly had a detrimental effect on the morale of our members that are working on the street. Obviously, we were called to order with the COVID pandemic. Our members, obviously continued to come to work. They certainly have the sense and feeling that they're not being supported by the City of Vancouver, which is very unfortunate because ultimately we live, some of us live and we work in this city. Our members day in and day out come to work. They do a phenomenal job. We're considered a world-class police department, And the reality is that a lot of our members now I think, are starting to consider Surrey as a very feasible option once hiring starts there, because they're quite confident they will be getting the support from the City Council in Surrey.
You said something interesting, that your members should not have to do this kind of work. So what you're saying is the mental health work in particular, I think you used the word downloading, has been downloaded onto you, and you don't want it. Correct?
Yeah.
Am I reading that right?
Well, yes, there are aspects of dealing with mental health clients that certainly should be left to mental health professionals. However, there is, and by demonstration of the warrants that have been issued in the last decade by the mental health professionals who are unable to deal with their clients or have been unable to find their clients, have issued warrants for those people's arrest. And then that obviously then falls on the police department to track down, find the people, and bring them back to a hospital or a mental health facility. And we do spend a lot of our time in hospital waiting with mental health patients to have them checked into a hospital. So, I mean, that's obviously one thing that we certainly think could be done in a much better way as well.
So what's being said here is that you should have budget cuts and that this work should be transferred to other people that should be funded to do this work. Am I getting that right?
Yes, well, certainly. So, and I guess here's an important piece too, right? So every year between the arrests we make ourselves and what they call a Form 21 apprehension when a warrant's been issued by a mental health professional, that equates to some 5,000 apprehensions a year. Now, if there was a cut and we were able to cut that in half, it's estimated that such a reduction would be the equivalent of 4 to 5 positions within the VPD. Now, that, there isn't millions of dollars being saved there with 4 to 5 positions. It would be $500,000.
Now, you mentioned that staffing levels had just recovered from 2009. What was the order of magnitude of headcount, additional officers between 2009 and 2020?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
You said that you had you had recovered to 2009 staffing levels, and I'm inquiring about how many headcount that was.
Yeah, so our authorized strength, and it has gone unchanged, has been 1,327, and we just finally this year just creeped over 1,327.
But you're only talking potentially about losing 4 to 5 positions.
Yes, but again, the point of it is 4 to 5 positions equates to some $500,000, not the $6 million that I've heard discussed by way of some meetings that have happened at City Hall. Okay,
so your point is, population's grown by 11% over this period. You've recovered up to your 1,327. You're being asked to disproportionately have budget cuts above and beyond what would reasonably be taken away from the budget if these positions were transferred back into the mental health profession area.
Yes.
I think I got it. Have I missed any part of this argument?
No,
but you were very
much. That is the logic. Okay,
yes.
Thank you very much. I think I got it.
Thank you. Councillor Fry, for up to 3 minutes.
Sure, thanks. Hi, Mr. Kaisers. Thanks for coming here today, and I do want to take an opportunity to thank you and your members for service to the city. I know that this conversation in the last few months have been fraught and polarizing, and I do want to reflect that I do think that we have an excellent police force, and I appreciate the dedication to that role. We've had a conversation, I think, online in the past when I introduced a motion fairly similar to this one that we're discussing today, and it ended up getting referred. But I specifically referenced a program called Cahoots that started out of Eugene, Oregon. Do you recall that conversation we had?
Yes, I did. I do remember you posting something about the Cahoots program in Eugene.
Yeah, so I just want to ask. I mean, I think where we're at as society and in the city of Vancouver and worldwide is this conversation around who we police and why. And I fully support the policing of bad people and dangerous people and criminals. But I think where we see the disconnect is on things like mental health and homelessness and stuff. And I think that you agree, and from what I've seen of the VPD literature, so does the department, that this is a download of services. What kind of solutions do you see? And I do see this as a not a flip of the switch kind of solution, but I'm just wondering what you think of programs like Cahoots and how you think we might move forward on this conversation.
Okay, something that you said that's very important here, and I think is that it is and should not be a flip of a switch, and that's where I think a lot of the issue is around this motion and the fear that it literally will be $6 million taken out of the budget and us losing a number of members to do our frontline service. Now, the Cahoots program in Eugene, Oregon, and I know it was something that you brought up. I think it was on Twitter, and I saw it, and obviously I had a few questions around how and what this program is. Now, the reality is it's a group of people. It's an NGO. There's no funding, it's not a government organization, and they work in coordination with the police department in Eugene, Oregon to deal with people that are suffering from mental health. And obviously that transcends into homelessness as well. Now, I guess the issue I have is, and again, do we have any true measurable evidence and what matrices have been used to measure its success? And I ask that because, this program's been in effect for some 30 years in Eugene, Oregon. It's the first I heard of it, and thank you for bringing it to my attention, because then I did actually look into it. If it's a successful program, I was quite surprised, A, that I haven't heard about it, and B, that, I haven't heard or seen any of the major urban police departments in the United States using it. And not that we want to compare ourselves to the Americans, but at the same time, if it was a successful program, why was it that it was not picked up by other departments, given that it had been a program of 30 years? Now, I'm not suggesting that we couldn't or shouldn't look at it or kind of go down the road of attempting something similar, but that's more tailored to Vancouver. But at the same time, I think, and like you said, it cannot be flipping the switch. It is something, and we've done it before in Vancouver here, in dealing with mental health crisis and clients, we established there were two separate pilot projects that the department did. We did the assertive outreach team and the assertive community treatment team, two programs partnered up with mental health care professionals to assist those people with the most complex of mental health issues. And these two units, and again, it was a pilot project that was over, I think initially before it became entrenched in the organization, was a 2-year pilot project. Both of these units have reduced the number of police contacts and emergency visits for most of the clients that they deal with. And they deal with ultimately the, 500 of the most susceptible mental health clients that you could think that are out there. One of these.
That is it for your time. Councillor Fry is well over his time, but thank you for making those points. And Councillor Fry, that's it for you. And Mr. Kaisers, I really appreciate it, and I know all of Council does. You're coming forward to speak to us on this matter. Thank you. Council, our next speaker, Howard Chow, is not yet on the line, unless that has changed in the last minute. Madam Clerk, could you advise, please?
Chair Carr, I believe Howard Chow is not on the line.
Got it. Okay, moving on then to Speaker 3, John Irwin, Commissioner with the Vancouver Park Board.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and Mayor and Council. Thanks for having me to speak today. I wanted to commend you for your vote on street checks. I thought that was a really good vote. I'm speaking in favor of the motion. I know that our police services do provide vital and important services to our city, but I do think that some of them are getting tied up in the more social work or mental health and addictions field than needs to be the case. I know that the department did a really good job with things like Car 86, but maybe we need much more Car 96s, which my understanding is their mental health specialists, and I think they can deal with some of the issues that are happening and being prevalent in our society much better. And I also think we could empower the third sector, the nonprofit sector. People like the Western Aboriginal Harm Reduction Society, Battered Women's Support Services, and things like that. And so I think that, looking at the budget historically, I just looked at the 2009 budget and it seemed to be around $218 million, and that was quite a bit less than 21%, which is what we have now, $339 million. So I think there's room, and there's probably room without necessarily, cutting into the sisters and brothers who work at the police department radically. It could be, a shift that we do reasonably and over time to start to shift money towards these other services. I also think, asking staff to report back with a plan and a timeline, I think that can be a positive aspect, so this isn't all just do it all at once and we'll do, a cut. Like I think Seattle at one point, if I understand correctly from the media coverage, the city council voted for a 50% cut. And then, I don't know that that's necessarily going to go through, but we're not talking about that here. I think we have a lot of real sort of steep issues in front of us. Some of them are part of the, Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations, that we need to think carefully and long and hard about how we're treating people experiencing, unhoused conditions, that I think throwing, police resources at that all the time is probably not a good use of resources. So yes, I'm just basically speaking in favor of the motion, and I don't want to take up 8 minutes, so I'll let you guys get on to the very long list that you have today.
Great. Thank you very much. 5 minutes, but you were still well under 5 minutes, so thank you. And you have no questions, but very much appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Carr. Bye.
Great, thank you. So we're moving on to Amal Rana, speaker number 4.
Yes, I'm here. It's Amal Rana.
Yes, great. Thank you. You have up to 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, council members, staff, those listening, and all who have worked on this. And a special thank you to Councillor Swanson for bringing this forward. My name is Amal Rana. My pronouns are they and she, and I'm calling from unceded Musqueam territories today. I'll be speaking on behalf of the city's Racial Ethnocultural Equity Advisory Committee, which I'm happy to share recently expressed its unanimous support for this motion and the motion to end street checks. I'm also a community organizer. I'll share some preamble remarks and then read out the committee's motion. As we have seen in the last several years and recently, police responses to community wellness often result in grave harm and the further perpetuation of oppression of marginalized communities. This is particularly true for racialized, low-income, disabled, and other communities. Furthermore, Indigenous and Black people we know face a disproportionate amount of harm at the hands of police and other carceral state structures. Racialized communities are still mourning the deaths of Ijaz Chaudhry, Chantel Moore, Regis Korchinski-Paquette, and many others who have been killed or deeply harmed due to police responding violently to what were supposed to be wellness checks. How many more community members, siblings, parents, uncles, aunties, and loved ones will we have to mourn? How much longer will we have to live in fear, not being able to ask for help and terrified of the possibility of police showing up and taking our lives? We need to urgently shift from a city where the trauma and vulnerabilities of marginalized people are criminalized into a city where community-based, trauma-informed responses that originate within decolonial frameworks become the norm. We cannot accept anything less. There is no time left for endless consultations while people's loved ones become the latest hashtag. Council has an opportunity here to come out on the right side of history with this motion and to act in tandem with the global calls for racial justice led by Indigenous and Black communities. This is a time for action. The community has spoken. Over 399 people have signed up to speak in resounding and unequivocal support of this motion. I'll now share the motion from the REC committee in support of this. Whereas the City of Vancouver and the Racial Ethnocultural Equity Advisory Committee are both committed to using an equity lens on social issues and have recently renewed a commitment to particularly prioritize the fight against anti-Indigenous and anti-Black racism at this time. Whereas current policing practices disproportionately criminalize Black and Indigenous communities as reflected in street check data, as well as rates of incarceration in provincial and federal prisons. Whereas the recent murders of Regis Korchinski-Paquette, Chantel Moore, and Ajaz Chaudhry, and before them many others, due to police violence during wellness checks, have underscored the urgency and necessity for community-based alternatives to keep our communities safe in times of mental health emergencies or other social needs. Whereas there is widespread recognition that calls related to social issues, including mental health, would be better served by peer, health, social, and community-based programming instead of local police, specifically the Vancouver Police Department. Evidence suggests that criminalization and policing are not effective solutions or harm reduction strategies for these concerns. Whereas a number of reports have made recommendations regarding the criminalization of Indigenous people, people who rely on public space, and people who use illicit substances, including Red Women Rising and Project Inclusion, confronting anti-homelessness and anti-substance user stigma in British Columbia. Therefore, be it resolved that the Racial and Ethnocultural Equity Advisory Committee asks Council to make clear its commitment to racial equity by passing the motion on decriminalizing poverty and supporting community-led safety initiatives. That the Racial and Ethnocultural Equity Advisory Committee asks Council to ensure that work on this motion is woven into the current and urgent work being done by staff on reconciliation, anti-Black racism, and equity, and that this work is appropriately resourced in the City of Vancouver's 2020 budget and beyond. That the Racial and Ethnocultural Equity Advisory Committee requests Council direct staff to meet with the committee and the Urban Indigenous Advisory Committee as soon as possible to discuss next steps regarding the motion, and that information is shared with other advisory committees. Thanks so much for your time.
And thank you for your time and presenting, and also your volunteerism on our committee. You do have questions. First from Councillor Swanson. Go ahead, Councillor Swanson. Up to 3 minutes.
Yes, thanks so much for coming and speaking and for your work in getting that motion passed in the committee. I just wanted to ask if you could say something about what is the significance of this motion for marginalized communities?
I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Councillor Swanson. I think much can be said. Will just speak straight from the heart on that one. I think that I have personally been in situations and had experiences with people in my racialized and BIPOC community circles where mental health vulnerabilities and moments have come up where we weren't sure what and really wanted support, and were very fearsome of calling the police and really worried about the impact of that would look like. So we spent all of our time really focused on trying to ensure that didn't happen, while not really being able to focus on the people who needed our support, because there is such an overwhelming fear. And I think if you look at what's been happening recently, the names that I mentioned are just a few of the names of people, mothers, sisters, siblings, uncles who have been lost to police violence through wellness checks. And I think that we shouldn't have to live in this constant state of fear. And racial trauma affects not just psychologically our beings, but also our bodies physically. And instead of being able to support our communities, we have to live with this constant fear of what will happen if we call the cops.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it's important for us to know that.
Okay, and that's your questions, Councillor Swanson?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you very much, Ms. Rana, for being with us. Thank you. We are on to the first of the speakers on our regular list, Taz Kandwani, speaker number 1.
Hi there. Am I coming in through? Sure I am.
Yes.
Good day, council members.
Yes.
My name is Taz, and I'm speaking in favor of this motion that moves towards decriminalizing poverty and community-led safety initiatives. I want to implore this council to support this motion because it is the humane thing to do. it is the smart thing to do. At a time when we're all waking up to the folly of police intervention regarding issues of poverty, mental health, and addictions, this is a welcomed motion. For example, every time a cop shows up to a mental health distress call, the chances of things going from bad to worse go significantly up, especially if the individual in distress is a person of color. Worse even yet, if the individual is Black or Indigenous. The data on overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous people in our carceral systems, deaths involving police, and being victims of abuse by the state and its apparatus, it's out there. So I won't get into the specifics of that. But I'll say this, that this motion moves us one step closer towards understanding the use of public money by the VPD as it relates to the policing of lives of folks living with mental health concerns, addictions, folks who are unhoused, and folks engaging in sex work. I think as a society, we've come to an understanding that an adversarial approach to these issues has not worked, and funneling more money to aggressively harass, to police folks in these situations is just throwing good money after bad. The need for transformative justice is now, and the global conversation regarding police violence and abolition of the carceral state is here to stay. As the province begins its review of the Police Act, this is an opportunity for Vancouver to be a leader and prioritize community-led safety initiatives while deprioritizing criminalization of poverty, and move towards compassion and care over cops. Another reason I support this motion, and the biggest reason, is because it's calling on the city to engage with experts involved with the lives of community members directly affected by over-policing, punitive bylaws, and police violence. Passing this motion will also signal that the city does value expertise of community members and organizations that have been doing harm reduction work and leading safety initiatives on the ground with very tight budgets. These organizations and groups have demands and solutions that empower the most vulnerable in our city. These reports, demands, and solutions are trauma-informed, and the folks working with these organizations are experts in these subject matters and are far better equipped to handle the concerns of mental health, homelessness, addictions, and sex work instead of police. In closing, I would like this council to familiarize themselves with the demands of Black Lives Matter Vancouver and Hogan Valley Society, to listen to the calls of Vancouver Aboriginal Transformative Justice Services Society for transformative justice, understand the needs of Vandu and Wish, pay attention and figure out ways to implement Red Women Rising Report's recommendations, and have a real conversation regarding Truth and Reconciliation Commission's findings and recommendations of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls' final report. Ultimately, to me, this motion is the first step toward understanding the harm caused to various marginalized and stigmatized communities in our city. And the answers aptly lay with the community organizations that have been calling for justice for way too long. I hope the council will do the right thing. Thank you for your time.
And thank you, Mr. Kondwani, for coming to speak to us. Very much appreciated. There are no questions to you, but thank you again. Second speaker, Laura Stannard.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You have up to 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Stannard, and I'm a white settler grateful to be speaking on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about my support for this important motion. I'm a West Side homeowner who grew up in Vancouver and raised 2 children here. I'm retired now, but for 25 years I worked in the downtown East Side as a community organizer, as an advocate, and as a mental health worker. I spent 6 years on the Vancouver City Planning Commission. I'm explaining this so you know I am not part of any, quote, small interest group, as the head of the Vancouver Police Union suggested. I'm speaking up because the criminalization of poverty and the violence that inflicts is not just a downtown East Side issue. It affects us all. In 2007, my neighbor Paul Boyd was shot to death by the Vancouver police while crawling across the street at Granville and 16th. But this motion isn't about individual communities. It's about who we are as a city. Are we a caring city or are we a killing city? According to the report CBC published today, in the last 20 years, 24 people had fatal encounters with the VPD. And we know this police violence is rising. We know that across Canada and the U.S., police interactions, including deaths, involve a way disproportionate number of people of color, a glaring result of our systemic racism. If we want to rid our city of our racism, this motion is where to start. For decades, reports citing an increase on police interactions with mentally ill people have landed at council's feet. Reports like Vancouver's mental health crisis, Lost in Transition, Beyond Lost in Transition, to name a few, and yet little has changed. I found estimates that between 25% to 70% of Vancouver police incidents involve people in mental health crisis, and yet we know far less than 25% of police training is devoted to teaching the skills needed in these situations. As a result, people are being killed by unnecessary force, and not only are friends and family survivors left with life-altering trauma and loss, but for the police officers involved in these incidents, there is also permanent damage. The police union fears this motion is just a money grab for downtown Eastside organizations. Although insulting, that fear could be assuaged if you think about the possibility of incorporating community emergency response teams into our health system. As a teenager, I was a volunteer for the Vancouver Crisis Center. I worked primarily on their youth crisis line, but I was also a member of the flying squad. This meant being on call for people needing face-to-face interaction and getting trained in first aid, de-escalation techniques, and nonviolent crisis intervention. I'm not suggesting this be used as the model now, but for years in Vancouver, this was how many mental health crises were resolved. Many people were taken to hospital by the flying squad or by ambulance, but I don't ever remember calling the police, nor a single incident of violence. Funding non-military organizations to hire and train mental health workers to intervene in mental health crises only makes sense. I have a vision of an urban peace corps comprised of skilled and compassionate people known in their communities and equipped to respond to non-criminal crises in Vancouver. With this motion, we have an opportunity to begin the work of dismantling our racism and creating a city we can be proud of. Imagine if we could call ourselves the caring capital of Canada. I urge you to support this motion in its entirety. Thanks.
And thank you very much, Ms. Standard. And you have no questions, but again, very much appreciate you speaking with us.
Thank you,
Thank you. Moving now to speaker 3, Louis Port-Petit.
An email reminder and courtesy call was made. However, he has not joined yet.
Thank you. Number 4, Nathaniel, I think, Lowe.
He hasn't joined either.
Number 5, Catherine Shortreed.
Hi there.
Great. Thank you
for
joining me. Yes, we can hear you, and you have up to 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Shortreed, and I am a resident of Vancouver. I am speaking in support of the motion. I'm a lawyer, and I operate Shortreed Law. I work with clients experiencing homelessness, mental illness, and incarceration. I've got a bachelor's degree and a law degree, but I've never taken any courses in social work, yet I've become the social worker of last resort for my clients. Many of my clients cannot handle basic problems on their own. Many of them grew up without positive role models. Many of them have brain injuries, or perhaps they were born with cognitive issues, or some combination. They need help. They need social workers, counselors, mental health support, and supportive housing. They need to be brought into our community instead of excluded from it. I've watched in court as a man with 26 prior convictions for shoplifting was convicted for a 27th time. The judge said, well, your last sentence was 60 days in jail, so this time let's do 75. And then he told the guy that he should try and get clean after this newest jail sentence. That's the peak of absurdity to me. We, with our university degrees and our positions of power, need to recognize that this guy, he's never going to help himself. He's experiencing homelessness, he's got a drug addiction, and he's just not capable of improving his life on his own. We're the ones who need to do something differently. I think the city of Vancouver might find it convenient financially to send offenders off to jail where they become the province's problem, but they just end up back in Vancouver. And then what happens? Well, what happened to me personally is I ended up with some guy breaking into my car and stealing my stuff. So the system as it stands didn't really help me anyways. I think we need to make greater options available, including drug rehabilitation programs and restorative justice programs. I'd like to bring the city's attention to the case of Deschutes County, Oregon, which back in the 90s successfully lobbied the state of Oregon to pay the county to keep youth offenders in local programs. The county used the money to fund intensive treatment programs for the offenders and used the leftover money for preventive programs. The city of Vancouver could do something similar. But then what about the violent offenders? The bad people, as I believe it was Councillor Fry put it. Well, firstly, I think you need to take a look at how they've gotten there. Correctional Services Canada doesn't even keep stats on recidivism, but we know that about 30% of offenders in federal custody are from an Indigenous background. Many offenders have gone straight through the foster system and into homelessness, drug abuse, and then ultimately violence. Once they're in prison, these offenders who can't follow the rules in prison because they have untreated mental health issues, brain injuries, untreated drug addictions, and cognitive issues, they just get put into higher and higher levels of security in prison, and then when their time's up, they go out onto the street, still untreated. A lot of these guys could have been dealt with before they became violent if proper services were provided on the front end. A lot of these guys still could be helped after their prison terms if they had intensive treatment and supportive housing. It doesn't take an expert to see that what we're doing just is not working. I appreciate that this motion specifically names a number of community groups whose input should be sought in how to carry this out. I think that most city councillors are not going to have the lived experience of being on that bottom rung of the ladder in society. And I don't think it's in the wheelhouse of bureaucrats to come up with new creative solutions to these long-standing problems. I think that bringing in these community groups, these nonprofits that have this experience and that have been trying for years to find and implement solutions with very limited funding is the way to do it. I'd like to briefly address one of the points made by the police officer. I think that we are looking here at more than just mental health apprehensions. We're looking at sex work, homelessness, how much time are officers spending evicting people from tent cities, how much time are officers spending on arresting that guy for his 27th shoplifting offense because he needs more money for drugs. I think there's a lot more money that can be saved if we invest it properly. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Shortreed. And you do have a question from Councillor Swanson, if you just want to stay on the line. Thank you. Councillor Swanson, go ahead for up to 3 minutes.
Thanks so much for coming and speaking. I really appreciate it. We get so many great perspectives in this process. I just wondered if you could talk for a minute about what you think passing this motion could mean to you and some of the people that you work with.
Sure. I think that passing this motion could, I think it's very much one of the first steps and certainly not the last step that's involved in this whole process. But what I see it as doing is that we could have better knowledge of what the police are doing and be able to break down bit by bit, what are they doing and is that necessary? Maybe some of it is, but maybe some of it's not. And how can we prevent the problems that are leading people to require this police involvement in the first place? And then I think that bringing in the community groups as a leading part of this would be very helpful in coming up with the types of solutions that are going to be effective and evidence-based and that are also going to work locally in Vancouver to make sure that we can actually implement proper programs that will lead to effective results in preventative services. And in terms of how that will help my clients, gosh, I can only imagine what would happen if I didn't have to be the one advocating for my clients when they have a dispute with their landlord over something silly, but they just don't know how to communicate well. And I know that if they're left on their own, they're going to go make a mess of things. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there could be somebody who doesn't need a whole law degree or isn't a police officer to just help them with some of the basics in life that they're simply not capable of doing themselves? We don't let, 8-year-old kids have to go off and negotiate with their landlords on their own. We know that they're not very good at that. So we do that for them. I've got people who are adults, but mentally, cognitively, not really. They need help. And they could have a much better life if we were helping them.
Okay, thank you so much, dear.
Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate you coming in.
Yep, that is it for your questions. But thank you also for joining council on this issue. I understand Speaker 6, Kelly Go, is not on the line. So Speaker 7, Kit Rothschild.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
Go ahead. Yes,
Perfect.
we can hear you.
Hello to councillors and members of the public. Thank you for your time and attention. My name is Kit Rothschild, and my pronouns are she and they. I want to acknowledge that I am an uninvited white Jewish settler on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I speak as a multiply disabled queer Jew, as someone who has been at risk of homelessness throughout my adult life, and as a former sex worker. I'm speaking on behalf of Pace Society, a nonprofit organization by, with, and for sex workers that has been serving people of all genders in the downtown east side of Vancouver for 25 years. Police have never been safe for members of the sex working community. The Picton trial and the disgusting way in which murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and their families were treated really made this crystal clear to all of us, including the general public. It is for this reason that PACE developed a city-funded occupational health and safety and violence prevention training for sex workers, which we have provided for 17 years. We are in support of Motion B3 to decriminalize poverty, deprioritizing police response, shifting funds and resources to community-led harm reduction and safety initiatives. While I wish this motion went much, much further, I cannot voice our support for this motion strongly enough. I'd like to share the following key points supporting our position. Firstly, Indigenous people represent 4% of Canada's population and are disproportionately represented in sex work. They make up over 50% of PACE's membership. In Canada, Indigenous people are disproportionately criminalized and over-policed. And none of this over-policing or other forms of colonial control have made Indigenous communities or even Canadian communities more generally safer. Rather, it engenders more harm, sometimes death, and more specifically relevant to this motion, it propagates poverty. As many members have discussed the colonialist route of policing in Canada while addressing the previous motion on street checks, I won't spend time reviewing that. But this kind of colonial oppression continues through modern policing bodies, as well as through Child and Family Services, the Mental Health Act, and more, that continue to enact harm and violence against Indigenous people. How can we continue pretending to be in a period of reconciliation if these colonial policing bodies continue to exist? Supporting Motion B4 is a step toward true decolonization and meaningfully increasing the safety of Indigenous people and sex workers. Secondly, any criminalization of sex workers makes us more unsafe and compounds poverty. Criminalizing our clients only hurts us. The current state of asymmetrical criminalization under Bill C-36 has created a climate of fear for workers and our clients. It pushes us underground and distances us from support. Further, policing fails to reduce the violence that some sex workers face. Police interactions with sex workers, even when called on by sex workers for their support, are more often than not re-traumatizing, stigmatizing, and dehumanizing. Reallocating resources from police budgets to support community-based public safety alternatives led by grassroots, peer-led organizations such as PACE would go a really long way in combating the deleterious effects of criminalizing and policing on sex worker communities. Deprioritizing police response is in line with the City of Vancouver's priority of improving the health and lives of sex workers. Finally, police reforms do not work. Performative reforms, such as hiring more liaisons to quote-unquote build trust with communities, have done nothing to change the root causes of that lack of trust. Stats tell us that body cameras don't reduce violence or death, implicit bias training doesn't reduce racism on the force, spending more money on more officers over time or an increasingly militarized weapons does not make our community here in the downtown east side or anywhere safer. It, in fact, makes us explicitly less safe. The fact that VPD Chief Adam Palmer claims that institutional racism doesn't exist at all in policing is part of the problem. Supporting Motion B3 would show the city's support and understanding of the current socio-political climate of our time and would more accurately reflect the attitudes of your voters. So I definitely don't think that this motion goes far enough. The motion put forward isn't radical. I believe we should stop wasting money throwing more police at problems that are only problems because of unjust laws. Let's repeal the unjust laws and that criminalize people. Let's reinvest in housing, in harm reduction, in healthcare, mental health care, a real social safety net, universal basic income, community justice initiatives, and more. Any one of these measures would do more at producing positive effects than further prioritizing police. All of them combined could, I pray, create a future where we have no need of police at all. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, and you do have questions, so just please remain in line. Councillor Swanson, go ahead with your questions, up to 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming and bringing PACE's point of view. I think that's really important. What would you say to folks who might think that this motion would make people less safe?
I would say that having all of the police that we're paying for currently isn't making people safe, so why would continuing to do that make any difference?
Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate you coming.
Thanks. I love you, Jean.
Great. Yeah. Madam Clerk, that's very nice. Madam Clerk, can we deal with, yes, exactly, and that's it for your questions. Thank you again for joining us. And Madam Clerk, that was quite a lot of noise there. If we could see what's happening with somebody's line. Council, we're moving on to Speaker 8 has withdrawn to Speaker 9 now, Ryder White.
Hello, councillors. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So go ahead, up to 5 minutes.
Lovely. Thank you. My name is Ryder White. I'd like to acknowledge my privilege and pleasure to live and work on these unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and in fact draw our attention to the notion that every time we make these land acknowledgements, taking the advice and input of Indigenous folks in our community is at the forefront of what we need to be doing. The land acknowledgements that we perform do not mean anything if we do not move forward on issues that directly impact them and disproportionately, I might say, impact them. So I think that's a very important reason why we're considering this motion today. I'm going to speak kind of from memory because I haven't been able to clear my entire life in order to wait for an opportunity to speak. So I'm just stepped out of work, but I just wanted to speak for myself as a resident of the downtown east side. I live in a house with my partner and our 3-year-old daughter on Cordova Street at Heatley. And what I've seen over the course of my nearly 4 years of living in the downtown east side, and then almost a decade of being involved with the area prior to that, is that the only things improving the well-being of everybody in my neighborhood and community are peer support and mutual aid groups, and police interactions in this vulnerable community have not served to make anything better. And that's why I'm in favor of motion B3. As the last speaker said, it is a motion that doesn't go far enough. I want to give you all a hearty commendation on passing motion B2, which is, brings us maybe just barely out of the dark ages, and say that Councillor Swanson's motion that's before you today presents an opportunity for council to show some real leadership and some real progressive thinking on how we view the role of police in our communities. The resources that we spend on policing are just unbelievable when you compare them with the resources that we spend on the services that are making an actual measurable impact on people's lives and well-being. And the fact alone that Chief Adam Palmer makes $363,000 a year, more than twice Mayor Stewart's salary, I believe, is just, it boggles the mind. Why are we pouring all of this money into people to walk around intimidating our neighbors and our friends with guns? I don't feel safe being approached by a police officer, and I am a white, straight passing man. I'm the person literally the least targeted by the police, and I still don't feel safe. So I can't imagine how people facing multiple barriers, how Black people, how Indigenous people, how people with mental illness see somebody coming up to them dripping with weapons and say, "Oh, this person is going to help me." It boggles the mind. It doesn't stand to logic. And what we're seeing all around the country and throughout North America and in other places in the world right now is saying that police make tense situations a lot worse, and their presence escalates conflict. And we need to be really embracing the idea of de-escalation and mutual aid / peer support if we want to make our communities truly safe and truly healthy. And I think the less negative takeaway from all of this is that you counselors have a real opportunity here to prove some real leadership. We don't have to wait for a really overt tragedy like the death of Regis Korchinski-Paquette. We don't have to wait for and Elijah McClain. We don't have to wait for something to happen like happened to George Floyd. I don't understand why we would have to wait for the police to murder somebody in order to take action. Not that they don't do that already, but it's, we should be learning from other people around us. That's what I'm trying to get at. We should be learning. We should be looking at the real data. We should be learning from thinkers and listening, particularly to Black community stakeholders, to Indigenous community stakeholders, and really prioritizing their experience and not just adding them to the overall roster of people, because we know that the police predominantly serve the status quo. They serve people with a great deal of privilege in society, and so those people will make their voices heard in favor of continuing disruptive policing like we currently have. And I think it's time for us to stop listening to those people, frankly. I think it's time for us to start listening to the people who have really had a hard time being heard for their entire lives. And if I can use my voice to speak to that, I really will. And I hope you listen to me and others.
Great, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Very much appreciate you coming in. There are no questions for you, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, just before I move on to the next speaker, the clerk is worried about quorum. So if you could make sure that your videos are on, or if you leave your chair or the seat where your computer is with the video, make sure that you are in range of the video camera so that the clerk can confirm that you were there. And Councillor Fry, are you there? The clerk is not sure. We're very touch and go, like at 6 for quorum. So, Councillor Fry, if you could just unmute yourself. Councillor Fry, we still can't hear you. Oh, actually, the clerk can now see you, so that's
yeah. Good. Sorry, you can see me though, right?
She just confirmed that she.
Yeah,
can't
Yeah. My apologies. The headset's bugging me, so I took my headset off, and I'm listening live, but I don't have a mic attached to that.
Got it.
Listening,
no problem.
not speaking.
I understand. 12 hours of wearing a headset is it's rather daunting.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Thank you. So I believe we do have quorum. Yeah, but please do pay attention to that, councillors. And we are now on to speaker. I think speaker 10 is not on the line. Maybe so. Speaker 10 is potentially in person. Is that correct? It says that She's supposed to be in person. Can I have a check, Madam
Chair
Clerk?
Carr,
Yes?
speaker number 10 is not on the line, but we do have speaker number 11 that's going to be in person, on the phone rather than in person.
All right. Okay. Then let's move on to Speaker 11, Kareem Ibrahim. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Council. My name is Kareem Ibrahim. I'm speaking on behalf of Law Students for Decriminalization and Harm Reduction, a group based out of UBC. We spoke briefly yesterday for motion B2, so I'm hoping to keep my comments as succinct as possible. We're a group of uninvited settlers on stolen Indigenous land, and we acknowledge that not only is that important to recognize, but we have an urgent duty to address the disproportionate harms that are facing Indigenous communities on these lands, which include those that you've heard of today, including policing and the over-incarceration of Indigenous people. And that is just the beginning of what we'll be discussing. We understand you've heard a great deal from our community online and during yesterday's discussion regarding the disproportionate targeting of Black and Indigenous people by police, about the painful and unacceptable irony of how wellness checks often impact civilians and often through assault and death, about the revolving door that is the, quote, criminal justice system, which files through people through stores, unraveling their lives continuously with frightening extent, homeless people, substance users, sex workers, mentally ill residents. And you've also heard about how police and prisons are two sides of the same coin. If you read through the correctional investigators' reports annually, you'll understand that all of the testimony provided by members of the community today and yesterday is unfortunately reflected in the populations of our prisons. I'm here to share 4 key points with you today that try to not touch on too much what you've already heard. Firstly, there can be no understatement of how desensitized we've all become to the dismal state of police accountability in the city. Notorious for having the highest rates of homelessness, which is a policy decision, mind you, Vancouver is a prime example of what happens when police powers go unchecked while enforcing laws which criminalize poverty, reliance on public space, personal substance use, mental illness, etc. Social media has helped us better understand the extent to which these abuses take place, as they previously went undocumented, and this must make us all question how complicit we've all been in allowing these abuses of power to go unchecked. As law students who work with community members who experience abuse at the hands of police, we are intimately aware of how unsafe these interactions with police are, how they set them back further each time, and how this exacerbates rates of homelessness and poverty in the city, something which I understand is of concern for you as councillors. Addressing this desensitization that lives in all of us, myself included, as people who are mostly unaffected by criminalization, means relentlessly questioning our biases and pushing ourselves and our colleagues to take bold action to address this long-standing issue. These statistics need not be repeated as the research is out there. Secondly, this is not an issue of scarcity. The VPD budget grew by around $140 million in the past 10 years, mostly due to a spike during the 2010 Olympic Games. And today, while this only comprises 21% of the police budget, we're spending a meager 5% on arts, culture, and community services combined. That includes affordable housing, childcare, homelessness services. These funds are desperately needed to address the ongoing effects of colonization, and they're being spent on an institution which has not been shown to respond with any interest in self-critique or accountability, as Chief Palmer has made evident through his denial of the existence of systemic racism in the VPD. Again, there are organizations who are very ready to provide the well-researched opinions that will inform how these community-led services can serve our community and make Vancouver less notorious for the extent to which homelessness and poverty run on our streets. And as law students, we're also intimately aware of how broken our police accountability institutions are. We carefully study case law, and when it comes to assisting low-income residents with their claims against the police, we know very well that the reality is that unless they have a lot of money, they are going to go through years of litigation without any meaningful remedy, besides perhaps a declaration from the police complaints office that the conduct was not fair. But unfortunately, that is the extent of it. And many of these residents will experience severe physical injury on account of these assaults, police dog bites that have lasting effects and PTSD impacts. The list is long, and these are things that you've been hearing about yesterday and today, so I won't go into that. My final point is one about how this is just one step in a much longer process. This motion calls for a mere investigation into what money is being spent on. We are not asking yet for the reinvestment of funds into institutions that are more prepared to spend them meaningfully on addressing the issues that plague our community. So as fellow occupants of stolen Indigenous lands, I implore you all to meaningfully investigate how you can undertake this work with the eventual goal of ensuring that our communities are safe and not policed, because unfortunately those realities are not mutual right now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ibrahim. And I do not see anybody on the list for questions for you, but very much appreciate the time you take to come to speak to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Moving on to speaker 12, Corrine Ng.
Corrine, you can go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, my name is Corrine Ng, and I am a Chinese settler on the stolen ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, and I'm here speaking on behalf of myself. I am a teacher, a practicing teacher in Vancouver, and also a resident. And I would just like to bring my perspective into this as a resident who's living very close to the downtown east side, not quite in it, and also as a teacher who works with students in the Vancouver school system. As a teacher, I see how specialized programs that are tailored for students who are marginalized by society have made a really positive impact, and how teachers and systems that are still entrenched in the carceral system actually do harm to them. So I would just like to apply that lens now into city issues. The way to, when we punish youth or people, I don't think we bring them to a better place. And I think that sends a message to the larger society who may not even understand the reality of many of these marginalized communities, what they're dealing with. I think what we need is more education. And I think the City Council is really well positioned right now through this call, and also whatever policies that are made at the City Hall is a message to larger society. There is a perception out there for, folks who fight for social justice and who might be behind this motion, supportive of this motion, that we are a minority and that we're radical folks, but and it's perhaps unfair to expect the society at large to understand this through and through. But I really think that, as elected officials at City Council, whatever decisions that come out of this is actually public education. It is pedagogy for residents of Vancouver. I see other cities being successful in doing this, namely Seattle, Minneapolis, and Toronto in 2017. The school district of Toronto was able to remove school officers from their schools. So this is actually not what we're doing here. The motion that we're looking at is not radical at all. This is really a first very cautious step towards what I think is simply getting some more clarity for society at large. I believe that the motion is good, but it can be stronger. I think data already exists. The fact that homelessness, substance abuse, and the ongoing crisis with drug-related deaths, those are data. What motion? The action in Part A that Council asked the police board to itemize the work they do is really just seeking more clarity. So I am in full support of this motion, and I implore city councillors to demonstrate leadership and be the beacon that Vancouver sorely needs. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And you do have questions. So Councillor Bly, up to 3 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much to the speaker for joining us today. I wanted to ask a question because you do come from the education system, and I have a lot of personal experience in the education system, particularly public school and in the high schools. And you touched on the police liaison, and I get a sense of where you are coming from in terms of the value of that program that's been called into question at the Vancouver School Board as of late. what I'm asking is, what would be your advice to this council, knowing that the province funds our public school programs, and I'm fully behind you around education and supporting young people through this as a way to better set up our society, population generally speaking, and there's a huge amounts of gaps in our public school system. What is your advice to us as a city council in Vancouver, in a pretty large region, in a pretty large province with complicated funding? How do we take that next step to not simply just write a letter or advocate, but to really be able to adequately fund this, knowing we have very few ways that we can raise money to pay for these programs as a local municipality?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Bly. I just want to reiterate that, when I brought up education, it was really just to highlight the fact of approaches that exist within the public system, of how when we provide those supports, like counselors, like mentorship program, with like a higher teacher to student ratios, like those things really help bring positive outcome. I realize that this motion does not deal with police presence in schools, but I do want to address the question about how to fund programs. So as far as I understand, the FLO program in Vancouver secondary schools do not, the school board actually doesn't put in much money into that. So, in terms of budgetary concern, I don't think it's really there. However, there is a perception that the FLO program provides certain services to the student. And I would argue that counselors, social workers are better trained to deal with things like de-escalation, preventative measures, and also building community between communities. One example is perhaps we can bring together newcomer students and Indigenous students. So that is one approach, for example, that I think we can, deal with perceived divisions, in communities, and really bring groups together that don't necessarily take on the perspective of, dealing with reconciliation mediated through the white lens. So that would be an example of an approach. And this is not, this will, of course, involve resources, human power, and ultimately money. But back to the point about the FLO programs, I don't think it actually costs the Vancouver district at all. But as at the City Hall, however, perhaps there could be, I'm not sure about, the inner workings of how that would work in terms of resource diversion, but is there a way that perhaps the city could work in collaboration with the province and the school district to provide these support services that, with qualified folks, professional folks who are trained to do that kind of work? Because I don't think, police officers have that training and that knowledge, and also the lived experiences that, a lot of these, marginalized communities experience.
Okay, so I appreciate that answer and how articulate you are with that. And so I guess my follow-up question is, I've heard that the city and the school board and the province need to continue to work together, and I don't think that there's any disagreement there. I'm just looking to see how we, my focus is going to be how do we redirect the funds that we are able to, as you say, resource diversion. When the school board is funded by the province sort of says what is going to happen with all of that.
And if you could be very quick, because Councillor Bly is over time.
It wasn't 5 minutes. No, you know what? I really appreciate your input and your insight, and you've given me a lot to think about as we go through listening to speakers and how we can best direct this motion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you so much, Speaker. And that is it for your questions. So we are on to Speaker 13 is withdrawn. So Speaker 14, Allison Gu.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead
Hello?
for up to 5 minutes. Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Allison. I am on the unceded Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. I grew up in Vancouver and have always been proud to be from a city that I thought was progressive when I was younger. Pardon me if I take pauses. I haven't had a chance to write down my thoughts, but as an Asian woman, I have never felt safe because of police. I don't know what it's like for other people when they see police, but for me, I just feel my heart drop into my stomach, and I know that I am not, despite me not being part of a demographic that is systematically targeted and in danger because of police presence. I currently work in the field of politics, so I am very aware that this is something that is in the complete jurisdiction and power of the municipal government. There is a lot of kind of, this is the provincial government's responsibility when it comes to issues like reallocating funding towards the police. There is, this motion clearly demonstrates that the municipal government has the power, and not just the power to make a real difference and actually hold up to what I believed growing up was a progressive city, but that just the bare minimum of holding police to account, with asking for transparency of how things are spent and where money is going. And I think that's not just an issue of justice and of safe and healthy communities. It's just logical, like, especially when municipal budgets, people are constantly hearing things like there's not enough flexibility in the budget. Municipal budgets don't have the funding for active transportation or accessible cities. And we constantly have to make sacrifices on other priorities that not only improve well-being, but decrease costs to our economy over the long term. So why is it where an issue that not only costs us an disproportionate amount of money, but also can save lives directly, is so contentious and considered to be so radical? Nobody's even in the conversations of reallocating funding towards community initiatives that actually help people stay safe and like preventative measures. Those conversations are like, they just make sense from a financial point of view. Other cities have done it, like Victoria did it, cities in the States have done it. So it's really like, this motion is not nearly as progressive as I think maybe mainstream media or people who are in support of increasing power to the police might want people to believe. It's just calling for transparency and wanting to know where our money is going. And as a Vancouver citizen, paying taxes, I know that's a very tired argument, but I think that we deserve to know, and in order to understand what the best steps going forward are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no questions for you, but again, thank you for taking the time to present to us. Is Speaker 16, Lisa Descari, on the line? Oh, I'm sorry, Council 15 has withdrawn, Lena Musclava. So Speaker 16, Lisa Descari?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Lisa Descari. I am a high school teacher and a white settler on these unceded lands. I'm a member of my union's local social justice committee, although I'm not speaking on behalf of them right now. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. And I think we all know the movement for Black Lives has really shone a spotlight on systemic racism that is present in the police. And, I'm sure all of you have been paying attention to that. But I think that some people that I've talked to think that this is only an American issue, and it's not an issue here. And statistics obviously say otherwise, as well as do the lived experiences of Black and Indigenous folks and many other marginalized peoples. And we've had some fantastic speakers speak to that today, so I won't repeat what they've said. But I think, it's important to look at the role of the police, which is the same in Canada as it is in the U.S. It really is largely to protect property and to protect the status quo, and it isn't really to keep people safe, and people have spoken to that too. But especially if you're a Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, they definitely don't make you feel safe, and they don't actually keep you safe. And it's interesting, someone shared with me some research that looked at how television shows have actually warped our view of what cops do, of what police do. And if you watch cop shows, you'd think that police spend most of their time solving major crimes and protecting people. But in fact, statistics show in Canada and in the US that is a very small percentage. It's less than 20% of what they do, and 80% of what they do is just protecting property and making people more unsafe in many communities. And I wanted to speak to what really is crime, and I think, Councillor Fry, you sort of brought this up, talking about sort of the bad people, and I know that's how we're taught to see them. But as a teacher, I know that really it's so much more effective to address the root causes of, we see sometimes violent behavior, we see the kids who become the future criminals. And all the research shows that if you address the root causes and look at why that's happening, that is how you deal with quote unquote crime. And that's true in our communities as well. And people have spoken to this, that actually to make our communities safer, we need supports for vulnerable populations. We need affordable housing to eliminate homelessness. We need supports for women to escape abusive partners. We need safe supply, decriminalization of drugs. And I think some of these things are within a city budget and not necessarily just provincial, although I understand different levels of government are going to be involved. But instead of funding those things, we could even just look at housing to eliminate homelessness. Every year we're told, there's not enough money really to do that. Meanwhile, police budgets have ballooned, even though crime rates have dropped all across North America. And if you can look at the stats. So the city's looking at budget cuts. I know that the mayor spoke to this and said with the impact of COVID, we're going to have to make cuts. But the one thing that's always considered untouchable is the police budget. In fact, the VPD budget has increased by 88% since 2008. While social services like housing are so woefully underfunded. And I just think that's a travesty. And, people have spoken to the fact this isn't a radical motion. Really, someone said long ago that you should give people reform or they might give you revolution. And I think really councillors should pass this very mild motion because the alternative is something like, what we're seeing in several American cities where there's drastic cuts to the police. And really, I would be much more in support of something a little stronger. I was going to give you a specific example, but people have spoken to their personal experiences with, someone who had mental health crises and was shot in Vancouver about 5 years ago within 1 minute of the police arriving. So these stories aren't just American. His name was Tony Phuong Nadu, and you may remember hearing his story. And one of the eyewitnesses had said to me, it was eerily similar to the killing of Tamir Rice by Cleveland police. So this is not just an American problem. People have spoken to the situation of Regis Churchinsky-Paquette. I'm friends with Sami Yatin's parents, and that was the same situation, right? Our police have the same problem the American police have. So they don't keep communities safe. And in terms of statistics, probably police shootings killed Indigenous people at a rate more than 10 times higher than they killed white Canadians. That's per capita. And Black Canadians, again, their deaths represent a rate that is, at least 4 times higher than the rate of police killings of white folks. And this doesn't even speak to non-lethal violence. So I just wanted to conclude by saying that I think City Council needs to listen to what Indigenous and Black communities have been saying for years. I know Sandy Hudson, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter Toronto, said CBC wasn't even willing to talk about violence in Canada when they were going to interview her on The Current. But they've been saying in years in Black communities, we need to defund and eventually abolish the police because police don't keep us safe. If Black and Indigenous lives really matter, and apparently City Council does have an equity lens when they look at these issues, then we need to listen to the voices of Red Women Rising, the voices of the Truth and Reconciliation Report that are calling for less policing, not more, and for more investment in the social services that do keep our cities most vulnerable safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, you have gone a bit over time, but I very much appreciate the input that you are providing. Council, I'm going to go to the next. Thank you. I'm going to go to the next speaker, who is apparently also on the line, and I'm going to actually propose a 10-minute health break for us. So just to keep that so that you have that to look forward to. Number 17, speaker Joanna Gray.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Just go ahead for up to 5 minutes.
Excellent, thank you. My name is Joanna. I'm a white settler on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam Nations. I want to thank the Council for hearing from the public on this motion, as well as those who have shared their experiences, both personal and from their work around these issues. And I'm here to voice my strong support for Councillor Swanson's motion to decriminalize poverty and support community-led safety initiatives. This motion presents the city with an excellent opportunity to take the very small first step of looking at exactly what defunding the police actually means. It starts by asking for data. Section A, or Resolution A, I'm not really sure what it's properly called, asks for an itemized listing of the work being done by police in the areas of homelessness, sex work, mental health, and substance use. Now, I'm pretty sure that the number of tickets issued in each of these areas could be provided easily, but it's also vital to know how much time and money is being spent on patrolling and enforcing these so-called criminal offenses. It's essentially asking how much of the city's resources are being devoted to enforcing laws that many of these affected people don't have much of a choice in breaking. Asking for data is very reasonable, and again, I'll add a very minimal first step. And it allows for evidence-based decision-making. If we can find out how much money is being spent enforcing laws that criminalize and, by the way, also reinforce homelessness, sex work, mental health, and substance use issues, we will find out just how much money can and should be reallocated to community organizations that actually help the people facing these issues. Tickets and fines aren't going to help raise these people out of their situations and actually only cause further harm, not only financially, but also through the violence they face because of enforcement. And in case you thought I wasn't going to mention it, there is overwhelming data-based evidence that this violence disproportionately affects Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities in Canada. Many of our institutions are already stacked against these communities, and policing these social issues just doubles down on the violence and harm that they face. So I'm a data person. I like looking at numbers. Work BC, the government website, has a number of job profiles on their website that include information about their median incomes. For example, the median income for a social worker who has a university degree in social work is a little under $70,000. Another example is a social and community services worker. These are people who don't necessarily have a degree in social work, but who do work in youth group homes, shelters, substance use centers, mental health facilities. Their median income is about $42,000. Now, the Vancouver Police Department's own recruitment website lists the salary of an officer who has worked for 4 years at about $100,000. This means that for the price of 2 police officers who, let me remind you, might not have the same education or experience to actually help those with issues of homelessness, sex work, mental health, and substance use, you could get 3 fully trained and educated social workers. Or you could get 5 social and community services workers who work on the front lines to help the people in their communities. You get 2.5 times more resources, and I'm sorry, but they're probably going to be better suited to, again, actually helping these people. And we need more of these workers. Cops aren't the ones helping the affected people find housing or shelter, or find better employment or education, or connecting them to healthcare services they need, or keeping them fed and clothed. This work is done by the social workers and the community and social services workers at community organizations. I mean, what provides people with more security? Getting a ticket or having a place to stay, stable income, healthcare services, and food and clothing? So if we if we get the data that quantifies how much time and money is being spent on policing these issues, we will get the dollar amount that can and should be reallocated to the community-led organizations. And the input from these organizations will be critical when looking at bolstering existing services or creating new ones that'll help people affected by homelessness, sex work, mental health, and substance use. They have the experience and they've been doing the frontline work and should absolutely lead the conversations around community-based harm reduction and safety services. So for these reasons, I wholeheartedly support the entirety of Councillor Swanson's motion to decriminalize poverty and support community-led safety initiatives, as well as the broader demand to defund the police and reallocate that money back into the community. So thank you again for listening to the public on these issues.
Great. And thank you for participating and coming to speak with us on these issues. Much appreciated. So, Council, I am going to propose that we take I don't think we need a motion to this, that we can just take a health break. Is that right, Madam Clerk? If I just call for a health break?
Chair Card, that would be fine.
Yeah, okay. It's 2:57 until back at 3:10. and I'll continue from there. Okay, Council, calling the meeting back to order, and we are on speaker number 18, which and that person has withdrawn. So next is Caleb Morrison, speaker 19.
I believe Caleb has also withdrawn.
Chair Carr, I can confirm that.
All right, great. And my understanding is number 20 has withdrawn as well. So 21, speaker 21, Nami Azizo.
I believe Nami Azizo has also withdrawn.
Okay. Speaker number 22, Bunny Wilder.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead for up to 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Bunny Wilder. I've lived in the so-called Vancouver, the stolen land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people all my life. I'm a white settler and a single parent and a queer and trans person. I want to speak today in support of this motion in its entirety, and I want to share with you a couple of stories about how the VPD has impacted me and my family's life. So, about 5 years ago, I experienced a serious mental health crisis. I called a crisis hotline. They were concerned for my well-being, and so they called 911. A VPD officer showed up to my house before the paramedics did. I was terrified. Even though I was not in a violent state and I was only a danger to myself in that moment, when the ambulance arrived to help me, the officer did not leave and instead accompanied me to the hospital, stood over my hospital bed. She told me that she could not leave until I took the medication that the ER staff had administered to me. I can't describe how much more traumatizing this experience was because of the police's involvement. At the lowest moment of my entire life, I felt threatened and criminalized because of my health status. In the hospital, I didn't feel that I could communicate with my medical providers about my care. My first priority was to do whatever it would take to get the police officer to leave. The officer who arrived at my house didn't do anything outwardly abusive or threatening to me, but her presence still made my experience so much worse. Instead of relief that I was going to get the needed medical care, I was feeling humiliated and terrified. Seeing weapons on her body was an implicit threat. As we know, 70% of people who are killed by the police have mental health or substance use issues. And we also know that police in BC kill more people than any other part of Canada. I can only imagine how much more terrified I would have been had I been a Black or Indigenous person, a deaf or hard of hearing person, a nonverbal autistic person, a non-English speaker, someone experiencing psychosis, or somebody who was intoxicated to the point they were unable to communicate. I was able to hear and understand the officer's instructions and comply with her. I wasn't scared that my race would be used as a reason or interpreted as a reason to use force against me. Nonetheless, to this day, I would not feel safe calling that hotline if I was in crisis again. My experience is just one of many that show that even when police respond to wellness checks without explicit force or violence, their presence is actively harmful. And unfortunately, we have seen that they do respond with force and violence all too often, as many other speakers today have listed names, the people who have been killed by police in Canada and in BC. The second story that I want to share with you today happened this year when I was attending a peaceful demonstration called for by Indigenous elders with my 6-year-old child. It was an explicitly family-friendly event, and many children and elders were in attendance. We were standing in a circle in an intersection, and some toddlers were playing catch and running around. VPD had cars and officers blocking the oncoming lane of traffic about a block away on all sides of us. Despite the road being blocked, someone managed to drive past the police barricades. Instead of turning around when they saw our gathering, the driver accelerated towards us, directly toward where the children were playing. The adults saw the car coming, and they moved towards it, throwing their bodies in front of the car to try to get them to stop. Knowing about car rammings and vehicular terrorist attacks we've had in Canada, we were all obviously terrified. Thank God the tactic of blocking the car worked, and the driver stopped, reversed, did a Y turn, and peeled away, right past the cop barricading the road, who did nothing. VPD officers witnessed all this happen. They did not stop the car from driving away. They did absolutely nothing. In fact, when one of the mothers of the children went to speak with the officer that the driver had driven right past, he laughed at her and rolled his window up. The community came together to protect itself in that moment, and the police did nothing. My child still talks about this incident and is now frightened of the police because they saw firsthand how they did not make any effort to keep us safe. The VPD is not interested in creating a community of safety for all. They serve the interests of those with money and power. I support this motion, Motion B3, as a first step toward creating real community infrastructures and organizations that will truly increase safety and public health. I urge Council to take this important step forward towards a city we can all be safe in. Thank you.
Chair Carr, I think you are muted.
Thank you. I was. You do have questions, so if you want to just stay on the line, Mayor Stewart, go ahead for up to 3 minutes.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me? Just switch my microphone around. You hear me, Chair Carr?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I just wanted to thank the speaker so much for participating in this council session today. I'm sure this is an incredibly traumatic thing to recall and to speak about publicly. So I just want to thank you for your bravery and courage and trying to help the community and through sharing your story. If I can ask, in the first story you told us, what would have been what would you have preferred the response have been from what I consider a government response? Many agencies involved in what you described as the worst time of your life. What would you have preferred if you could do it, if it could happen again?
Sure. So obviously, I would hope that it would never happen again to me or anyone else, but obviously we live in a world where people do experience crises on a regular basis. So I think something that would have made a great difference to me is if, the person who showed up to my door had been somebody who was trained in de-escalation, who was ready to engage with me in a kind and compassionate way, who wasn't acting in any kind of role as enforcing a law or reacting to a crime, because it's not a criminal situation, it's a medical situation. So that could include like a paramedic or somebody of that ilk, but it could also include like a community-based support team. Especially, it would have been amazing to have somebody who was known to me, who was part of my network of care, whether that be through a community center or another organizing group, who I knew was trained in this kind of de-escalation and crisis response and mental health first aid.
Thank you. I know I just have a minute left here, but now the police do work with Vancouver Coastal Health and other agencies to produce kind of a mixed team. I'm just wondering, did you ever get an explanation as to why a team was not sent to you when you were in difficulty?
I did not, but I am aware of the CAR 87 initiative that the police have had since, I believe, the 70s. And what I know about it is that ultimately, even when an officer and a nurse are dispatched together, the officer still has final say on what happens in that interaction. And if the officer decides to approach it as a criminal matter, or that decides that there is some kind of a threat that warrants a police response, that is actually not up to the medical professional in those circumstances. So I do think that kind of response actually is quite harmful in and of itself. Even though it has the appearance of being a harm reduction, I think it actually still causes a lot of harm.
Okay, that's great, and thank you so much for your participation today. And your child has much to be proud of. Thank you for all you do for our community.
Thank you.
Great, thank you again. And that's it for questions. Speaker 23 is not on the line, I understand. Just correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Clerk. And 24 is not here in person or on the line. So that's Hillary Eisen, Karen Hurd, and 25, Tamara Herman, not on the line either. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair Carr.
Okay, Speaker 26 is withdrawn. So we're on to Speaker 27, Daisy Couture.
Hi there. My name is Daisy Couture. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a lifelong resident of Vancouver, specifically East Vancouver. I am speaking today to voice my very strong support for Motion B3. I am very thankful to this place I have grown up in, but as I become a full adult, I want it to change. I want it to become more caring and supportive, less militarized and policed. I am a white settler who has never been targeted by the police myself, but I have witnessed their violence up close, and I am really, really tired of being afraid for my friends and community's well-being whenever the police show their faces. The police are a source of fear for so many people. Black and Indigenous communities have been calling for reduced policing for years, and I think this motion is a great first step. As many others have noted, the VPD takes up 21% of the City of Vancouver's budget, more than arts, culture, or community services, and yet the VPD are a source of violence and oppression to many people in the city, specifically Black and Indigenous folks. This level of spending is unconscionable, as policing does not keep us safe, and given the violence that police enact, it would be irresponsible for council not to gather data on their spending and work to redistribute funds to community organizations that can more suitably address the many concurrent crises that we are currently facing, from the pandemic to lack of affordable housing and the overdose crisis. This motion is particularly urgent in this moment of reckoning with anti-Black violence that is occurring in Vancouver and around the world. The BC Civil Liberties Association has shown that Indigenous and Black Vancouverites are disproportionately targeted by police. Policing does not increase the well-being of our communities. Earlier during this meeting, Councillor Fry referred to the many dangerous and bad people who the Vancouver police deal with. And I would like to note, as many previous speakers have mentioned, that the Canadian Association of Police Chiefs themselves have admitted that up to 80% of their work is non-crime related and instead deals with issues that arise from poverty. The police are not the people who should be dealing with this. As council members, you are obligated to improve the lives of everyone in the city, not just the most privileged. It has been well established that the VPD is an agent of white supremacy and that heavy police presence actively harms people in the city. We are in a time of intense change and crisis, and that is really intimidating and scary, but we have also seen that meaningful change can happen, and it can happen fast. This is just a first step, but the deprioritization of policing cannot wait. I urge you all to support motion B3. Thank you so much for your time and listening to all of us speakers.
Yeah, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. And there are no questions. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So moving on to 28, Will Gladman, 29, Emma Chamberson, 30, Marita Michaelis. My understanding is none of them are on the line. And 31 has withdrawn. So on to speaker 32, Summer Jarana Moynihan.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello there?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. My name is Summer Moynihan, and my pronouns are they, them. I'd like to thank Councillor Swanson for putting this motion forth. I'm a care aide for folks with developmental disabilities in the Lower Mainland, and I'm an Irish Fijian settler on the Marpole neighborhood on the unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh territory. I'm speaking in support of decriminalizing poverty and supporting community-led safety initiatives in Vancouver. I would like to share an experience I had in 2011 during the Oban Festival on Powell Street, when I found a painting of the tent city in Oppenheimer Park that I had wished to purchase. The artist was a resident of the park that I had been talking with. When I went to my car to get my wallet, I came back and he was nowhere to be seen. Sorry, one moment. Upon seeing a VPD car parked in the area, I described him and where he was sitting 30 minutes beforehand to the two officers standing outside the car. I was told by one of the officers that all of them look the same and that I'm wasting my money. They said this to an 11-year-old child. We need support for all citizens of the city and law enforcement that see homeless individuals as they are. People. Not problems you deal with, but people who deserve the same rights and to be protected by those who swore to ensure safety for all. I cannot stand behind a police force where the mentality that the mentally ill, drug users, sex workers, and homeless citizens are a hindrance and a nuisance that's so normalized that the partner of the police officer said nothing and appeared completely unfazed by the comments made. I was 11 years old. I am now 6 days from turning 20, and I will continue to use my voice to give the next generation a chance at a healthy relationship in their communities. I would also like to ask if there will be any laws put in place, should this motion go forth, that will protect citizens who utilize the community-led resources and the folks that run them, as there has been photographic evidence of VPD squadron cars parked in front of drug resource centers, deterring individuals from seeking harm reduction tools out of fear that they will be subjected to interrogation, harassment, and violence. I urge council members to support all aspects of this motion, and I thank you for your efforts. Thank you.
And thank you for coming to speak to council. Very much appreciated. There's no questions for you, but again, thank you very much. And that moves us on, council, to speaker 33, V. Bowie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. Go ahead for up to 5 minutes. Yes, go ahead.
My name is V. Bowie. I use they, them as pronouns. I'm first generation Vietnamese, queer, non-binary, working class, and I experience various privileges, including being someone who is not directly affected by anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Blackness, ableism, transmisogyny, sex worker antagonism, poverty, homelessness, drug overdose, and police brutality. I've resided on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations in so-called Vancouver for most of my life, and I'm speaking today in support of the motion to decriminalize poverty and supporting community-led safety initiatives. I want to express gratitude to the speakers before me and who have and will be disclosing sensitive and personal information about themselves publicly. People shouldn't have to relive their trauma in order to justify why we need to stop violence. People telling us that they have been harmed or the fact that people are killed by public servants should be evidence enough. With regard to this motion, I feel it's a very tiny step, and at the same time, I believe it is an important one in the right direction toward addressing, reducing, and eliminating the violence and harm that comes from policing institutions around the world, including right here at home. I have to say, I don't know where to begin, and I feel it's absurd that we have to beg and plead to do something that seems so obvious in this day and age. But I do want to speak to a story that I'm very familiar with, which is the story of Tony Du, a Vietnamese Chinese man who lived in South Vancouver and was mentally ill. And on November 22nd in 2014, Tony was in distress and was witnessed holding a piece of wood and clanging it on a chain link fence at the corner of East 41st and 9th Street. A white neighbor who was in the area at the time decided to call the police. And when the VPD arrived, they fired beanbag rounds at him and then shot him with live rounds, all within less than 30 seconds upon their arrival. The people responsible for his death, which was ruled a homicide through the BC coroner's inquest, Constable Andrew Peters and Constable Trevor Letourneau, still walk free. And in fact, Letourneau is working as a police liaison at a secondary school in Vancouver. Meanwhile, Tony's family now has lost a brother and a son and are forever scarred by this horrendous experience. Tony needed help, and instead his life was ended. And part of why I'm sharing this story is because it's one of many and countless examples of the overreach of the police and how they're incredibly inappropriate and ill-equipped to deal with the very real crises that people experience every day around the city and around the world. I want to echo a lot of the sentiment that people have already put forward around the emphasis and the need for community-led initiatives and really restructuring and really taking a deep look at the incredible problems that come from the current policing institutions and looking at the different ways we can do something different because at this point it's not about more training or more policies. It's really an overhaul of the existing systems that are very clearly broken. And so that's why I'm speaking today, and I want to reiterate my support of the motion to decriminalize poverty and to support community-led safety initiatives. Thank you.
And thank you very much. There are no questions to you, but again, I appreciate you taking the time to speak to council on this. Thank you. Council, we are on to speaker 34, who's not on the line, Lillian Deeb. Speaker 35, Summer Ibrahim, has withdrawn. Speakers 36, Eva Naziri, 37, Dr. Ismail Traore, 38, Jacob Fisher-Schmidt, 39, Lawrence, 40, Lauren Byrne, 41, Nicole Deslauriers, and 42, Anahita Septi are not on the line.
I'm on the line.
Sorry to interrupt. Lawrence is on the line. I
Oh, Lawrence. All right.
Yeah, 39.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Lawrence is on. Okay.
Hello,
apologies.
can you hear me?
Yes, and you're speaker 39, is that right?
Yeah, my name's Elena Lawrence.
Great. Okay, thank you. Go ahead for up to 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'd really like to thank Councilmember Swanson for bringing this forward. I'm speaking in support of this initiative. I'm just going to reiterate what a lot of people have said. I live actually very close to City Hall, right between the Biltmore Hotel and City Hall. So I have a lot of interactions with police and members of the Rain City housing project that's at the Biltmore. And the police are just not equipped to deal with what these folks need. And I'm just going to reiterate what people said before. Over 80% of what the police deal with is not solving crimes and, doing what they're supposed to be doing of keeping us safe. So I don't understand why their budget needs to keep growing and growing. I really like the points that I think it was Speaker 12 made around the cost associated with having police officers. I think it's great to have well-paying jobs that are city jobs and secure, but at the same time, we need to be careful about where our funds are going. And they should be going to the goal, which is helping people. So I agree that asking for data is a great option, and understanding how we are criminalizing poverty and how much money we're literally wasting criminalizing poverty. These folks don't have any choice with some of the decisions that they're making. And we need to support them so that they don't have to make these really difficult choices of breaking the law and staying alive, or not eating tonight or not staying alive tonight. So that's not a choice. They have to do this. So the budget has almost doubled since 2008, and I just don't think it needs to do that. This is just a very small step to get us to where we need to be. So I think the ask for data is good. I think this is the start of something. I think we should look and learn from programs like Cahoots in the States, and there are some other good community-led initiatives, but we need a made in Vancouver solution that addresses our unique needs, because we have a special confluence of issues due to drug use, mental health issues, and the fact that we're currently residing on stolen land. So I'm just asking you to take this first step for reconciliation and to support the Indigenous and Black lives that are getting over-policed and decriminalizing things that people can't control. Thank you so much for giving me the time to speak today.
And thank you very much for speaking to us. Very much appreciate it. No questions to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
okay. Yeah, thank you. So, Council, we're moving on to Speaker 40, Lauren Byrne. My understanding is Lauren Byrne is not on the line. 41, Nicole Deslauriers is not on the line. 42, Anahita Sebdi is not on the line. 43 is withdrawn. And 44 is on the line. Maria Gillis.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, up to 5 minutes.
Okay, great. My name is Mariah Gillis, and I am a settler here on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, more specifically in the neighborhood of Hastings Sunrise. I'm speaking in support of this motion, and I want to thank Councillor Swanson for bringing it forward. As Canadians, we often like to compare ourselves to Americans and say, thank God we don't have their problems. But if you ask people in this city, they'll likely say that they support protests against police brutality in the U.S. because we can plainly see through the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, and even going back to Rodney King, that there's a legitimate problem with over-policing in the U.S. The LAPD is one of the most militarized police forces in the world, and I think most Vancouverites would say our city has very different priorities, especially given how much we struggle with homelessness and the overdose crisis. You would think those would be our priorities, but if we look at city budgets as a reflection of our priorities, it's clear that that's not the case. If we take the LAPD as an example, their budget is $1.7 billion, which is 16% of the total Los Angeles city budget. Minneapolis, home to George Floyd, where the city council is committed to seriously defunding their police force, spends $194 million, so 9% of their budget on policing. Now, the VPD's budget of $340.4 million is a whopping 20% of our city budget. I think this screams our priorities last year, and we can no longer pretend to be more enlightened than Americans. It's truly unbelievable that a mild proposal to just reassess, not even cut, this wildly inflated budget would meet so much resistance. To those opposed to the motion, when we see the citizens in the streets of Minneapolis and LA passionately demanding defunding police budgets that are 9 and 16% of their total city budget, what do you think is going to happen here if council refuses to even itemize police work and seek non-punitive alternatives? Especially after hundreds of people spoke to you about their personal negative experiences here with the VPD and their passion for seeking change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no questions to you, but again, thank you for speaking to council. That very much appreciated. So council, that's takes us to speaker 45, who I believe Catherine Hoon is not on the line. 46 has withdrawn, Nicole Luongo. 47 has withdrawn. 48, M. Luddington, not on the line. 49, Teresa Ann Clark Harter, not on the line. But 50, speaker 50, Megan Milton, is on the line. Go ahead if you're on the line there.
Oh, hi. Hello. Are you guys hearing me?
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you. Go ahead. Yes.
Awesome. I'm Megan Milton. I'm speaking in favor of the motion. I really want to thank Councillor Swanson for bringing it up. I am the family member and the main caregiver for a person who often finds himself in mental health crisis. Every roughly 2 years, my favorite aunt in the whole world goes through psychosis. And that means that every 2 years I have to call her doctor, her social worker, and every single time, sometimes more than once in that episode, I will have to call the nurse's hotline, and they tell me to call for car 87, and then I call car 87, and what has happened every single time is they have told me that there's a wait list of 1 to 2 days or 3 to 4 days or a week. If I'm calling the nurse's hotline, that means that I'm begging for the help of a mental health care professional. I don't have a car. I can't take her in there with me. I am begging for help, and every single time I have been denied. This program has existed since the 70s. We've known since the 70s that it was a good idea for it to exist. The fact that we're not funding it is disgusting. It's upsetting. It shows what the priorities are of the VPD. We know that it works. It could be funded, and it's not. And this is the reason that this motion needs to be passed. The VPD will not look into their accounting. They will not make decisions like this for themselves. They need to be held accountable, and collecting data on what they're spending their money in isn't going to hurt anybody, but the police hurt people every single day. They have hurt my aunt. They have hurt me by proxy, and I'm tired of this. My best friend lost her brother to an overdose a week ago. No, it was, 2 or 3 weeks ago, actually. And she had asked for a similar program to be sent to check in on her brother. And they told her that they couldn't make it for a week. And she waited for a week. And in that time, he OD'd. And the reason that she did not send the police to go check on him is because he had a history with the police. People are having to make that choice every single day. Family members are having to make that choice every single day. We saw what happened to Chantel Moore and all of the other people who have died during wellness checks. I am very lucky to be a settler. I'm very lucky to be white. And for that reason, I am very lucky to pretty much have a tiny bit of faith in the fact that my aunt will not be killed at the hands of police. She will just be probably beat up. And that is horrible. In 2008, the first time we had to call the VPD specifically for this, a VPD officer told my mom that my aunt will be a problem until she dies. A problem until she dies. That is the attitude of maybe not every VPD member, but if it's just one person's attitude, that means that she's going to be a problem until she dies, and she might die at the hands of the police, and that is why we need this motion, and we need far more. I think that's it that I have to say.
You do have questions. So just if you want to just hang on for 1 sec. Mayor Stewart, go ahead with your questions.
Thank you, Chair Carr, and I just wanted to thank you so much for participating in our discussion here today, caller. That's I can hear the just the pain that all this has caused you, and thank you so much for speaking up. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you just a few details about your experience with Car 87, because we have heard different accounts of this, and so this is.
They've never once
but
come.
They've never. So have you ever
Four times I have
interacted with?
Regular police have been sent because Car 87 was not available 4 times.
Right. And what are your perceptions? So if Car 87 did come, what are your perceptions as to what would happen that would be different?
Well, I mean, I would like to think that it would be a different interaction. I'm sure it would be, but at the end of the day, it shouldn't be someone with a gun responding to this. I mean, if you go to the hospital, if you go to the psych ward, it's unarmed people that's entire job is, handling people who are in distress and psychosis. People like that exist. Why are we not employing them to do that? It doesn't make any sense. The police, they didn't get into it to do this. If they wanted to be psych workers, they would have been psych workers. If they don't even want to do this. Like, they shouldn't be sent at all.
Okay, thanks very much. And again, I'm very sorry for what you've experienced, but thank you very much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Stewart, and thank you very much for taking the time to present to Council. Council, we do have speaker number 48 on the line now, M. Ludington. So I'll ask M. Ludington to proceed.
Hi there. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm actually on vacation. Okay, great. I'm by the ocean, so it might be a bit windy. But I honestly, just because I didn't anticipate getting on today and I'm on vacation, so the timing was kind of wild, I am not super prepared to speak, but so I probably won't need my full 5 minutes, but I just wanted to say that I'm in support of this motion. I think it is obviously whatever approaches to providing care to the downtown east side and to impoverished and marginalized and oppressed individuals is not working, because these individuals are still experiencing marginalization and oppression and a lack of effective and consistent care. And so I'm really excited to hear this motion is being considered, because I think that radical change and radical care requires radical endeavors, such as decriminalizing, like taking steps to formally decriminalize poverty. And I just am looking at some slides that I saved that regarding how much, like, the incredible budget that goes towards the Vancouver Police Department. Like, I believe I read somewhere that it's 20% of the city's entire budget, and I just believe, based on what I've read and a number of articles and reports that I've read, just that whatever they're being tasked to do too many things, to provide care and services and support to too many people, too many communities, and in too many ways. And the VPD is not set up to provide such care. It can never be. No single kind of entity can be prepared to provide such diverse services and support. And I think that it would be best to divest this budget so that better funds can go towards actual community resources, such as mental health professionals, nurses, support workers and social workers, de-escalators, trauma-informed de-escalators, et cetera. And I just think it's about time, because whatever has been done, the VPD's involvement in especially the downtown east side, like, nothing is really seeming to change, which means that it might be time for a new strategy. Yeah, I think that's like all I really had to say. I'm sorry that I'm not more prepared, but I just really want to throw my energy as a student and a professional and an educator and a scholar and an artist behind this. I'm a settler, and I just think that we as settlers and people privilege and power need to do differently. This city needs to do differently. And this motion was one of the first times recently that I felt kind of excited for something to actually be done that could be equitable and effective, and actually possibly create some meaningful and long-lasting change. That's all I want to say.
That's great. Thank you. You don't have any questions, but thank you for taking the time while on vacation by the ocean. Very, very good of you to call in. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Great. That moves us, Council, to Speaker 50, who I believe is on the line, Megan Milton. No, yes, sorry, already done that. 52, Dylan Zrobeck. Is Dylan Zrobeck on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Is this Dylan Zrobeck? Great, we can hear you. Go ahead for up to 5 minutes.
Great. Hi, Dylan Zrobeck, he, him pronouns. I've been a resident of the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations for the past 2 years. Particularly, I've been working in the downtown east side and witnessed continually how increased police presence fails to keep communities safe. In particular, it only serves to further marginalize our most vulnerable populations, particularly Indigenous, Black, people of color, queer, trans, two-spirit, unhoused populations, street-based sex workers, people with disabilities, people experiencing poverty, substance addiction. These are our most vulnerable populations, and they're continually targeted by police who maintain as a priority private property law, failing to keep these communities safe. In recent experiences, particularly with Hogan's Alley, peaceful protest during which protesters, black femmes, were arrested by armed police officers who saw as their initiative to dismantle a protest for black rights, Indigenous rights. Instead of investing in the police, who, as has been mentioned by previous speakers, the Vancouver Police Department has a 20% of the entire city budget. Instead of investing more in police, we should be redirecting these funds to community-based initiatives, peer support, education, mental health intervention, social support, things such as transformative justice, rehab, harm reduction, housing initiatives, all things that will contribute to a safer community rather than increased police presence and violence.
Yes. Mrs. Zrobeck?
Yes.
Okay. Have you completed your comments?
I have completed my comments.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. There are no questions for you, but again, appreciate you taking the time to speak to council. Thank you. Council, I may not have noticed Speaker 51 had withdrawn, and Speaker 53 has withdrawn, and that leads us to Speaker 54, Gabrielle Goodman.
Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
You bet. We can hear you clearly. Go ahead. Up to 5 minutes.
Excellent. Yes, thank you so much for hearing me. I am coming to speak in support of the motion. I am a white Jewish settler speaking from the territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples, also known as East Vancouver. I want to broadly talk about what are we trying to do? What is this money doing, right? We have all of these tax dollars going into policing our community, and what are we really getting for them? And crucially, as the police want to conceive of themselves as decreasing crime, right? So we need to look at the broad picture of how much money we have been pouring into our police department and what has it gotten us. So, like many have said before, it's 20%. It's 20% of the city budget, approximately. And my a little bit better than back of the napkin math has told me that the budget since 2011 has increased by about 40%. So it was about $199 million in 2011. It's $367 million this year. So that's about 40% once you're adjusting for inflation. So why has the budget increased by 40% in 10 years? What necessitated that? Furthermore, if you look at the number of dollars per resident spent on policing them, my number was $329 per person. So for me, for every counselor sitting in this room, I'm assuming you're sitting, I can't see you, that was $329 in 2011. It's $476 today. What are we doing that requires $100 more to police in 10 years? What has changed, right? I don't think an answer can be found that really justifies this. So we're talking about, okay, what happens next year? Another 2%, 3% increase for the budget every year forever? We really need to seriously look at every dollar we spend and what does it really get us, and what is the comparative cost of what we are not spending on, right? That is the true, to me, the goal of this motion. So first, we have 3 emergency services, right? Why do we only have 3? It's not written in stone. It's not in the Bible, right? We can have more. We can totally reconceive of how we do community safety in our community. CAR 87, it's not just about retraining or increasing services inside of the policing. Why don't we establish CAR 87 as its own service, a 4th essential service in our city that will deal with the numerous problems that the police are ill-equipped to deal with, as they have been telling us, right? So it's number 1, establishing new community services. Number 2, dealing with these problems in the front end. We know in the last 10 years, poverty has continued to grow. Our homeless population continued to grow. Our low-income people being squished by rising rents, stagnating wages. We know this all across the city. All of that is a recipe for a failure in truly addressing crime in our community. So we need to address those problems, because every dollar we spend on policing could actually be better spent in all of those areas. And if the police truly do care about crime, I think that that's their true reason of being, is to prevent crime, protect against crime, investigate murder. Power to them. But there's also ample evidence that this is a system of racial control that has existed in our country for since its founding, since the colonization of this land, and a system of protecting private property for the rich and powerful. If the VDP really do care about investigating murders, then it's incumbent to support this motion. If it's not an issue of really reducing crime and investigating murders, then it's pretty clear what the true role of the police in our community is. And lastly, I'd like to encourage every member of council who has personal connections to the police to recuse themselves from voting on this motion. And I will yield my time.
Okay, thank you very much. And you have no questions. So thank you again for taking the time to express yourself to council. That leads us to Speaker 55, Cale Gosson. Cale Gosson?
Gosson, yeah, I'm here. Thank you. I actually spoke yesterday also, so I will just briefly reintroduce myself. My name's Cale. I'm calling from East Vancouver on the unceded and stolen territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Yesterday, in the support of the ending street checks, glad that passed, I gave a brief history lesson on some racism in Vancouver, so I'm going to skip that part today, although I do think that's relevant. And I'm calling in support of the motion today. So I'm actually out and about in my car, pulled over to the side of the road. Hopefully my dog doesn't bark. So I will go through what I've managed to scribble also on the back of the napkin. I actually co-founded 2 months ago a consulting firm called Humanize, because we saw a need to talk about anti-racism and do webinars and stuff on that consulting in Vancouver. And so we started actually running a webinar called Defund the Police when I started doing a lot of research around this, because I found there was a big need to talk about that and understand things around defunding the police, which has different meanings and context to different people. And I learned a lot about that, specifically about Vancouver, a lot that's been mentioned, the budgets and how that all works. One thing related to this motion specifically, talking about homelessness in Vancouver as a problem. While we were making that workshop, there was an incident where a group of homeless people, mainly Indigenous people, were being shuffled kind of around the city. They had set up in Crab Park. Previously, they'd been in Oppenheimer. Then they were moved to Strathcona. I was watching live on Instagram as there were protesters down there trying to help this. There was tons of police vans. These people were being pushed in vans. What ended up happening, they ended up at Strathcona. So, this is the police way of dealing with homelessness. These people were just shuffled from park to park. What is the point of this? This is costing a ton of money. We have armed police officers with, pretty serious guns and vans all out there shuffling elderly, the most marginalized people in our community to take them to another park to set up, taking all their belongings and, which is traumatic for these people. What is that money we're spending on that for? That's money that can be used to home these people, to help, do all kinds of other services. So this is the kind of situation I'm seeing when, how we're dealing with homelessness in the city. To shuffle these people around. I just don't see the point of that. And, so I see in this motion talking about, the fact that we don't even have right now the itemized information on the work they're doing around health, mental health, homelessness, sex work is kind of mind-boggling to me. And I found that through the webinars we led, trying to dig into information, finding information about budgets, what they're spending money on. It's extremely difficult to access, and considering we're paying for that, I find that very, and the fact that I have an accounting background and want to be able to dig into this information, I find alarming because I'd never looked for it before. And then when I went to go look for it and couldn't find it, I found that quite shocking. I thought, oh, well, of course, if you want to access that information, you should be readily able to access that. So, that was one thing I learned when I started teaching these workshops, how hard it is to get this information. So at the very least, I think that's a key step, a small but important step that we need to take. And I'm glad that that's an important part of this motion. And in studying this sort of thing, I've heard police all across from North America, from the States, but across Canada too, come out right and say, they are overburdened, they're overtaxed, their jobs have become way more than what they're trained for. They're publicly saying this, so the police are admitting and saying themselves, they're being sent to do things beyond their capabilities. And I think that that's fair. I think that they're asking for help. Of course, it's hard to give up money you're already getting, but I think that they're even saying themselves that there are areas that they need other help in. And if we are able to start accessing the information of what they're doing, we can start seeing where, those holes in. I think the key thing I look for and ask, and other people doing this work ask, is what are the police doing right? That's the place to start, right? What are they doing right? And when I look at things like how they're dealing with homelessness, people I know and love that are sex workers, how they feel when they interact with the police, how marginalized Black, Indigenous, people of color feel when they're interacting with police, those are not things they're doing right. If you ask the people that are interacting with them, those are not worth getting right, which is why I think it's really important, the part of the motion that asks for Black Lives Matter and WISH and the BC Civil Liberties Association to be asked for input. That's how you get change to happen. You ask the people who are being impacted to have a voice. You don't just tell them what they need. You ask them what they need. And I think that's really key. As far as the budget being increased so much, especially that the last speaker pointed out, I looked at those numbers and I was also amazed. Why is that increase so massive, especially over the last 10 years? I've lived in Vancouver 10, 15 years, and I certainly haven't seen anything. Yeah, okay. I just wanted to,
Okay, thank you. You are up into your time. But thank you. Thank you very much. You don't have any questions? I greatly appreciate you taking the time. Thank you to speak with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is, we're now on to, 57, Chelsea Colwell.
Hi. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
we can hear you. Yep.
Yes, so my name is Chelsea Caldwell, and I'm speaking in favor of this motion. I wanted to thank each counselor for listening, as well as each speaker before me and those coming after me for their efforts, and to anyone else who's listening for their attention. I've just completed my first year of law school, and I've come to understand that criminalization of certain activities is unproductive to the purposes of safety and health. This is especially the case for drug use, sex work, mental health, and homelessness. Vancouver is on the forefront of issues of homelessness and drug use, and while it can be seen as an impossibly daunting situation, I actually have great hope that Vancouver can be on the forefront of solving these issues. For example, Insight changed the landscape of Canadian law when it came to safe injection, and we have incredibly dedicated and passionate community-based initiatives in this city, and this motion supports learning from those groups to make our city safer and healthier. I support this motion because it is research-based and demands the creation of a thought-out plan with stages based on that research. I love Vancouver and its residents, and I think this motion has the power to make meaningful and lasting change in the lives of not only the most vulnerable in our city, but perhaps lead to solutions that provide examples to other communities as well. That's all I have to say, but thank you so much for your time.
And thank you very much. Again, no speakers. No questions to you, but thank you for speaking with us. So we are, let's see, on to 58, who is JT Zhang, and my understanding is not on the line. And 59 has withdrawn, and speaker 60 would be next, Bobin K. Monga.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Hello. Thank you, Council and Councillor Swanson, for putting forth this important motion. Although there is an endless list of reasons I support the motion, I will keep my statement brief. I am deeply grateful for the statements made by my fellow callers, as well as heartened, even if, and I am certain, as well as heartened by their responses. I am certain that all Vancouver residents have something they can contribute to the conversation regarding how homelessness, addiction, mental health, and the many other issues our city faces are not best served by the current status of policing. To divert the ever-expanding policing budget into services and initiatives that remedy these problems at the root is the ethically, financially, and democratically responsible thing to do. I have had both positive and negative experiences with police. However, as echoed by my fellow callers, even the greatest police officer is not an adequate or appropriate response to someone facing homelessness, addiction, or a health crisis. Police, no matter how well-trained or outstanding an individual they may be, are tasked with the organized administration and enforcement of criminalization and violence in our society. To quote the old saying, to the person holding a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. During my commutes down Hastings Street or the SkyTrain to university as a student at SFU, or working downtown, both on Granville and Robson Street, or even as a resident of the comparatively quiet South Vancouver, I have witnessed countless interactions between police and individuals who should not have had to deal with police officers. I've had conversations with police officers themselves who have corroborated these sentiments. This has been a decades-long problem in our city, and the police, increasing policing is clearly not the solution. We need something more. I have read and reviewed the motion carefully. It is a very tempered, rational response to our problems as a city and provides an excellent first step for our city to remedy some of these decades-long problems. We have seen examples of how Portuguese decriminalization of drugs has helped their opioid situation, how Helsinki's housing first policy as a city has helped their society, and now how the groundswell of public sentiment has shifted into fixing these problems. The time is now. I hope this council will be the one to take the historic first steps that this motion embodies. I thank you so much. That's my statement.
And great. Thank you so much. And no questions, but we very much appreciate you speaking to us. Thank you. So, Council, we're on to 61, which has withdrawn, and I believe Speaker 62, Georgia Bradley, is on the line.
Hi, my name is Georgia Bradley, and I'm speaking from the unceded and stolen land of the nations of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I am a resident of Vancouver's West End, a recent graduate of UBC, and a longtime hospitality worker. I am calling in support of Councillor Swanson's motion, decriminalizing poverty and supporting community-led safety initiatives. In the context of both the COVID-19 pandemic and the global police violence crisis, both of which disproportionately affect Black, Indigenous, racialized, and impoverished communities, it is wholly inappropriate that 20% of the city's budget is consumed by the Vancouver Police Department. The system of policing by the VPD on the unceded Coast Salish territories actively endangers people, especially marginalized groups, and it perpetuates ongoing white supremacy. While Vancouver is suffering through a housing crisis, the opioid epidemic, underfunded mental health services, and many communities that are in desperate need of infrastructure, the very least that needs to be done is a review of how the VPD operates and to actively seek opportunities for redistributing money to community groups. I additionally respectfully request that Councillors Melissa DeGenova and Sarah Kirby-Young recuse themselves from voting as they are married to police officers, and for them to fail to recognize this conflict of interest would harm their credibility. Thank you for your time.
They have recused themselves. So thank you very much for your time. There are no questions. Thank you very much. That takes us to 63 on the list, and Winslow Hanson, who is not on the line, but 64, Speaker 64, Eden Chung is. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, great.
Yep,
I just want to make 2
points.
points. I just want to make 2 points very quickly. The first one is a few of the previous callers have talked about the VPD budget inflating from 10 years ago. But if you recall, 10 years ago was when Vancouver hosted the Olympics, at which point VPD got a huge budget boost. So I believe the correct or more informative year to compare it to would be 2009. And 2009 had a budget of about 195 million. I just looked this up online. Adjusting for inflation, that puts us to 232 million, which is more than $100 million below what's being proposed for 2021. I trust you guys have better access to the numbers than I do, but that's just some napkin math. It's about $100 million more than inflation would suggest from 2009, which again, to reiterate, is, I believe, more informative. The second point about defunding the police, I just want to share the story of the Freedom House Ambulance Service, which came out of Pittsburgh. It was one of the first sort of like citywide ambulance services. Began in 1967. So prior to this, most city paramedics were just part of the police services, and so people who needed paramedic services would be placed at the back of a paddy wagon. And obviously, this was not a great system. It wasn't serving people who were in medical distress, and especially wasn't serving Black communities in the United States, which is where Freedom Ambulance Service began. From this ambulance service, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. The ambulance service here eventually grew into what we now recognize as like the third branch of first responders. So nowadays, when we think of first responders, it's obvious we have the police, we have fire, and we have EMS. But it wasn't always like this. So what we conceive of as the modern ambulance service was, in fact, an outcome of defunding the police. And a previous caller suggested turning Car 87 into the fourth branch. And I think that is just one aspect, one way we can envision a more just future, right? Like defunding the police doesn't mean anarchy. It just means like ambulances. It means mental health services available for people who need it, so that we're not sending just a man with a gun to somebody who needs, a mental health wellness check. With the remainder of my time, I just want to note that Councillors DeGenova and Kirby-Young have recused themselves, and I'm grateful for this. That's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us on this issue. Thank you. Speaker 65, Council, is not on the line, but Speaker 66, Laura Evelyn Pate Danny, is on the line. Go ahead.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Excellent. Well, first of all, like most people have been saying, thank you to everyone who has been speaking thus far. I'm just sort of getting out of a class right now, and I'm going into another one, so I have to keep this brief. Most of what I want to say has been said already, but I'm a queer trans woman living here on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. And I mean, I've seen people struggling to survive blocks away from some of the wealthiest people in this colonial state. And if it really makes the genteel public so uncomfortable that they would criminalize poverty, then I recommend some of their tax money goes to these people who deserve a decent standard of living. Given that so many of those living without a home are the rightful stewards of this land, call it reparations. The start of them, anyway. Or if they're the haughty type, I don't know, call it altruism. Whatever pushes it through. The fact that it takes this many voices and this much pressure to make this council consider the dignity of those who live without a roof over their head is kind of a disgrace, but this has not been said many times already. The homeless, especially Indigenous folks, should have every right to lay their head all over this city. And if anyone has aesthetic concerns, then they can fight for housing. And we need to quit throwing up walls and gates and lift a finger to help. As for policing, I think it's absurd that I call the same people to deal with a murder that I do that if a man is having a manic episode outside of my house and needs help. We need to reinvest the money that we put toward the newest police gear into our communities, and not just into social services like mental health responders, but to neighborhood houses and food banks and shelters for the homeless and the abused and safe injection sites, just to name a few. And while we're at it, we need to reinvest police funding toward the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, whose land this city is built, so that they can have more and ideally total control over how their land is kept safe. The time for paternalism and authoritarian colonial-style governance is over. It's failed to do anything for all but the most privileged among us. So I implore you now to make these changes peacefully. Thank you.
And thank you for taking the time to speak with us on this issue. Very much appreciated, but you have no questions. Thank you. That leads to speaker 67, Arabelle. Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Hello, Mr. Mayor and City Councilors. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that I'm calling from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Arabelle. I'm a privileged white settler speaking on behalf of myself in strong support of this motion. I'll start by saying I had a very hard time choosing the words to share today. As I researched and looked through all the information I could find, I found myself struggling to decide which of the points you would care most about. What few statistics or stories of abuse could I add to this important conversation in 5 minutes that would help convince you that the city needs to change the way it's operating? Is it sharing statistics about how little training the VPD receive, or the fact that none of their standard training has anything to do with the situations they find themselves in the most? Situations related to poverty, drug use, and mental illness. A CBC investigation revealed that since the year 2000, around 70% of police-involved fatalities in Canada have been of people in mental health or substance use crises, or both. Is it sharing the fact that police-conducted wellness checks have resulted in 4 deaths in Canada since April alone? Would sharing quotes from ex-police officers help? Cops who are talking honestly about the fact they're required to do things they're not trained or qualified for, that racism is embedded into their departments and training, that they have knowingly inflicted abuse, that their indoctrination demands that they protect each other at all costs? Is it talking about the fact that $340 million was spent in 2020 on policing in Vancouver? That's 21% of the city's total budget. Arts, culture, and community services are 5% of the budget, and included in that 5% are critical services like affordable housing, childcare, and homelessness services. Or that policing disproportionately criminalizes Black and Indigenous communities, which is reflected in street check data and incarceration rates in provincial and federal prisons. As I found myself reviewing these budget statistics and stories, trying to decide which one could help influence you to make the right decision, I realized how sad it is that I even need to. We are all here trying to convince you that human beings should be treated with dignity, that they should be provided resources to thrive and to be met with compassion and expertise instead of being punished, neglected, and abused. It's common sense that resources and compassion and expertise are more effective than criminalization. Research tells us this, but so does our intuition. It's the lessons we teach our children. It's basic human decency. The criminal justice system is broken and it is racist. And as we've heard from previous callers, there is real pain, abuse, and trauma that is being caused because we're too scared or lazy or ignorant or racist or privileged or prideful to relook at things, to change what's not working, and to do what's right. We have a small opportunity to do that today. It's long overdue that we listen to and take direction from our residents who are facing racism, neglect, and abuse. Myself, along with many other residents, will continue to speak up until our community is a place in which Indigenous people, Black people, people of color, Two-Spirit, trans people, people living in poverty, unhoused residents on the downtown east side, people with disabilities, people using substances, street-based sex workers, and other marginalized groups are not targeted. The priorities of our city need to shift so that we don't continue to prioritize white privileged residents such as myself, and instead prioritize these residents who have been neglected in our city's resources and decisions for far too long. This motion is one small step in the right direction. It's simply a responsible, humane decision to collect information and data on how the Vancouver Police Department operates and to seek opportunities for redistributing money to community groups with lived experience that have expertise in community-led harm reduction and safety initiatives. If this motion doesn't pass, it does mean prioritizing abusive, racist police practices over the safety, mental health, and well-being of the residents you have all been elected to support. You have the opportunity to create real change in the lives of residents. This is not a decision that will impact scooters or whether or not people can drink in public spaces. This is the decision that could literally save lives and stop trauma. Lastly, I would like to give gratitude and to acknowledge the Black, Indigenous people of color who have been in the work of anti-racism for centuries and who have created and shared resources, statistics, stories, and information, as well as for the incredible wisdom and lived experiences of the callers I've heard today and that will come after me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I hope you all realize the deep responsibility and incredible possibility you hold in your vote.
Thank you very much, and no questions to you, but appreciate your willingness to take the time to speak to us on this issue. Thank you. Council 68, Speaker Grace Matheson has withdrawn, which leads us to Speaker 69, Zoe Luba.
Oh, sorry. Just wanted to let you know that caller 60 just joined. Should we still move on to 69?
I'm sorry. Did you say caller 60?
Yeah, 60.
We've already heard from caller 60.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Manga?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, never mind. Let's go for 69. Zoe, your line is open.
Thank you.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Well, yes, we can. Go ahead.
Hi. Thanks. Good. Glad you can hear me. I want to start by acknowledging and recognizing that I am speaking today on the occupied and unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And secondly, I did want to really quickly flag that I found it I tried really hard to speak yesterday during my time in favor of the motion for that letter to be sent to the police board, encouraging the ban of street checks. But it was really difficult to navigate. My phone stopped working, and then I missed my turn, and then I kept trying to call back for hours and tweeting, and just nothing worked. So just wanted to flag that for you all. I did try to speak. Couldn't, but I did try. Secondly, I just wanted to really quickly speak in favor of Councillor Swanson's motion to decriminalize or to take a step towards decriminalizing poverty on these Indigenous territories under siege by the colonial Canadian state. Definitely a first step, and I don't really think I have that much to add to this conversation that hasn't already been said so eloquently and so well before me. But I do want to ground what I'm saying in the words of one of the most inspiring prison abolitionists I know, named Mariam Kaba, and something that I was reading an interview she did right after Trump was elected, and something she always says is that the system is not broken. The system is functioning exactly how it was designed to function, propped up by capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism to funnel white supremacist violence against Black, Indigenous people of color. So a few wealthy people can continue to profit off of this pain and violence. So I really do want to see there be some actual stats about the VPD budget that would show how much is being spent on these things that really just criminalize poverty. And then I really would like to see this consultation happen with groups that are directly impacted by these systems of violence, like sex workers, drug users, homeless people. Like all of these people deserve to have their full humanity respected, and to even have to like speak to all of you and try to make an argument as to why you need to respect people's humanity and not continue to allow them to be murdered and brutalized by the Vancouver Police Department feels a little bit horrible, to be honest. But I still want to add my voice. Hopefully you listen, and hopefully this motion passes tonight as a bare minimum first step, recognizing that, you know, until the whole system is abolished, we're never going to have true liberation for everyone who deserves it. I yield my time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for speaking with us. And we're unlikely to get to a vote for many days. We have 400 speakers on this item, and we're at speaker 72. So just to let you know, there'll be some time before we get to that decision. But thank you very much for letting us know how you feel about the issue. That takes us to, let's see, 70. Speaker 70, Hayden Ostrom, is withdrawn. 71, Megan Bentley is not on the line. And 72, Emma Arco.
I am on the line.
Yes.
Yeah,
oh, Megan? It's Megan or Emma? Megan or
Oh,
Emma?
Megan.
Megan, you are. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Good. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry for yelling at you. Hi. So hello, my name is Megan Bentley, and I do use she, her pronouns. I am calling from the unceded and stolen territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I am speaking in support of this motion. All humans deserve to feel safe when asking for help and support, and that includes all humans. And it especially includes humans living with mental illness and addiction, or living in poverty. And it's very scary, because if you are calling for help and that help could result in injury and death, then the system isn't working. And as someone that knows and loves someone who lives with mental illness and has been with someone in crisis and has been in physical danger, I have to say, based on everything, I would not call the police. And then that would put everyone in danger. Because I don't know what the outcome would be. So we need to be able to call for help and know that best practices are being used. And that is just not what is happening right now. So please vote to support this motion. We need to be funding services that support humans and not police humans, because all humans deserve to have services where they can safely get help. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much for taking the time to inform us of how you feel on the issue. That's very important. So, and there are no questions to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And so that leads us to 72, Emma Arkle.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. It's Emma Arkell. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name, as I said, is Emma Arkell, and I am a resident of the city of Vancouver, which exists on the traditional unceded lands of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam people. I am here speaking on behalf of myself. First off, I would like to express my gratitude for the ability to speak in front of City Council on this incredibly important issue. I am in favor of Motion B3, decriminalizing poverty and supporting community-led initiatives. I support this motion because I am appalled that 21% of our city's budget goes towards the police, while only 5% goes towards the arts, culture, and community services, which includes affordable housing, homelessness services, and childcare. It is clear that our tax dollars and our energy are being spent on the wrong things. We need to focus on the root causes of poverty, homelessness, addiction, and violence, rather than on punishing people who are in crisis. But my reasons for supporting this measure are not merely a matter of economics. It is a matter of racial justice, decolonization, and human rights, first and foremost. I work with multi-barriered youth in East Vancouver, and for the past 8 months, I have been engaging them in conversations about crime and crime prevention. I want to share some of the things that I have learned from our conversations. They are not interested in short-sighted solutions to poverty that involve increased police presence in their neighborhoods. They know from firsthand experience, as well as from the experiences of those around them, that the police treat Black, Indigenous, queer, disabled, unhoused, and those working in sex work differently from how they treat the white and the wealthy. These disparities are reflected in the statistics surrounding street checks, which Council heard about earlier this week, as well as in the recent spate of RCMP wellness checks that have ended in the abuse or killing of Black, Indigenous, and POC lives. These youth, they want effective alternatives to police as first responders. They want someone else to call when they encounter someone in crisis. The youth I work with know that if they call the police to respond to someone dealing with a mental health crisis, someone who is potentially overdosed, or someone who is being abused, those in crisis will likely not receive the help they really need. They will instead be subsumed into the criminal justice system, which then opens them up to harassment, fines, or even possible jail time. These interactions with the criminal justice system can stick with you for the rest of your life. They can impact your ability to find an apartment, get a job, take out a loan, access government services, or travel, just to name a few things. The youth that I work with know that compassion and empathy are the way forward, not criminalization. Continuing to fund the police while consistently defunding public transit, affordable housing, and community safety programs exacerbates social problems like homelessness and the opioid crisis and perpetuates white supremacy and anti-Blackness. The initiatives that replace the kind of police work that we're talking about today need to be community-led and need to center the involvement of people who are unhoused, living with addiction, living with mental illness, or engaged in sex work. Likewise, the initiatives that are developed when you pass this vital motion need to be informed and led by groups like Black Lives Matter Vancouver, Pivot Legal Society, Vandu, Hogan's Alley Society, Vancouver Aboriginal Transformative Justice Services Society, Battered Women Support Services, just to name a few. I want to leave you with this. People are experts of their own experiences. Listen to them. Thank you for your time, Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time to speak to us on this issue. Thank you. So, councillors, we are at 73, Speaker 73, Jonathan Twilight Orr, who has withdrawn, and now Speaker 74, Cherry Collard, who I believe is on the line.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Cherry Collard, and I'm here speaking on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And thank you, councillors, and everybody for your time in hearing myself and others speak on this motion. I am speaking in strong support of this motion and appreciate the opportunity to hear those who have spoken before me today, and I look forward to hearing from many more who will follow. There's been a lot of expertise and research that has been brought into the conversation today, and I trust that you're all listening with open minds and ready to kind of take this as far as we need to go with it. But most of the points that I actually wanted to say have already been said, so I'm going to try and keep this brief for you. But the motion put forward by Councillor Swanson is, I believe, an essential first step on the road to kind of dismantling the oppressive and colonial systems that we have in place that disproportionately criminalise and terrorise Black and Indigenous communities. I hope that we can work towards rebuilding stronger supports for people in need in our communities, and instead of having a budget where 21% is going to the police, an institution put in place to protect essentially the haves from the have-nots, responding to calls based out of people's fear, but often then the police responding to those calls in a way that incites further fear in people who are already often in a much worse position than many of the people who are best to live in Vancouver or own homes here and work here. I myself come from a family with a history of mental illness, and I think in light of everything that we've seen lately in the news and reports here in Canada, and I've done a lot of research into the way that the police here in Canada do respond to the kinds of calls that they are inappropriately dealing with, calls to do with mental health, drug addiction, substance abuse, homelessness, poverty, they show up armed, they incite further fears to these people, and I can't imagine anything worse than someone in my family who's suffering, or anyone in my community, anybody at all, any human being who is suffering from any kind of problem themselves, being met with the inappropriate support from us. I believe that we really have a duty to intently analyze the systems that we have in place and work together to change those systems, because they just do not work. They were never the right systems, and today they aren't. And I think the motion that Councillor Swanson has put forward, simply asking to collect proper data on what exactly the police are doing, so that we can see exactly where we can reapportion, hopefully in the future, that budget, so that we can have more than 5% going to essential community services. We've got so many wonderful organisations here in Vancouver who are working, who have expertise and who are working towards this kind of vision of a future, and there's just not enough funding, not enough attention, and we need to listen to those mentioned in the motion by Councillor Swanson, and rely on their expertise, and also listen to the community on this. I myself envision a future where we don't rely on one armed police force to respond to the many nuanced and challenging calls relating to poverty, mental health, drug use, etc. I believe that we are far too late to this conversation. We shouldn't. I myself feel too late to this conversation. I think this is something that we should have addressed a long time ago, but we have a really profound opportunity to talk about this now and to carry this conversation forward for the rest of the future to come. And I think it's up to all of us to listen to each other and to take part in these conversations, particularly listening to those Black and Indigenous members of our community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You have no questions. I appreciate you very much taking the time to speak with us. Great. Thank you. And we are council on speaker number 75, Dinah Holiday.
Hi. Are you able to hear me? Hi.
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you. My name is Dinah Holiday. I am a student at the Peter A. Allard School of Law. I am the co-president of the Black Law Students Association. Myself and SALSA, which is the short form for Black Law Students Association of UBC, support this motion. I'd like to thank Councillor Swanson for bringing forward this motion, and I would also like to thank the other councillors for taking the time to listen to this, myself and other speakers with an open mind. This motion, I believe, is calling for the first step in critically evaluating and changing how we organize our communities and how we view police work. This motion calls for an evidence-based approach to governance of our city. There is ample evidence that the majority of police work is not involved in responding to or preventing crime. And my background is in criminology. My undergraduate degree was in criminology. And there's also ample evidence, should anyone care to look, that police are not effective in preventing crime. There is evidence, however, that within our criminal justice system and within the police specifically, there is evidence of systemic racism. Everybody in Vancouver is not policed the same. Indigenous persons and Black persons and other racialized groups are disproportionately represented at every level of the criminal justice system. The police are not an effective way to achieve many of the aims that they're traditionally believed to achieve, and they are actively involved in harming different individuals in this community, in our community. This motion provides council a roadmap for how council can move forward. It encourages councils to be each one of you on council to be a leader, to consult with community organizations, to gather data on what exactly the police are doing and spending this insane amount of money on. It encourages you to hold them accountable. And it also allows an opportunity to begin real substantial change, and substantive change. It is an opportunity to save lives. We are at a moment in history, and while these things have been true for many years, and while there have been problems with the police force and with the way that our institutions are run and the privileges they bestow on certain persons and deny others for many years, we're at a moment in history where you've been given the opportunity and the power and the responsibility to make a change. And I'm calling today to encourage and ask that that you do that. And I think a lot of the other speakers have spoke to much of the evidence that exists and many of the practical reasons, both economically, logically, why this motion should be voted for. And so I don't have anything else to say, but thank you for your time.
And thank you for your time, and very much appreciate that. And yes, thank you, and for you expressing your opinion to us. Okay, Council, we're on to Speaker 76, who apparently is not on the line, and 77, Leslie Kemp, who is.
Hi there. I'm Leslie. Hi, I'm Leslie. I live in Grandview Woodland on the stolen land of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. And the comments that people have made are so powerful. The stories, the facts, the arguments shows how much passion there is and determination to make fundamental changes. And I support the comments that people have made. And so in considering how to respond to this motion, I urge the mayor and councillors to think about the kind of city we want to have. Let's look at the big picture and then how best to achieve that. As others have pointed out, that most of the petty crime that police deal with could be prevented through measures that have nothing to do with the police. If all of us had decent housing, a livable income, if we had access to health care, education, and other needed services, we would have a much healthier society. And this alone would greatly reduce crime and reduce mental health issues, which are significantly exacerbated due to so many deficiencies that we have in our society, that we don't have access to those services. And while the gaps, to address those gaps would require a lot of greater resources than local government can bring to bear on its own. When we look at the police budget at, I think it's $1.6 billion, is a huge potential source of funds available to address those issues if we spent it differently. And I think questions are rightly being raised about the efficacy of using police to do wellness checks and to deal with mental health issues, because neither their training or the purpose of police makes them suited to do this. And we've seen great, especially in this time of COVID, mutual aid and support at a neighborhood level. In Grandview Woodland, there's a lot of really incredible things happening. And those kinds of things enhance social cohesion. And so will enable police resources to be used in a manner that is more cost-effective, more effective and less costly. And I just want to mention this report from the BC Centre for Disease Control in 2016 looks at, is mitigating social cohesion a planning priority for BC municipalities? And they refer to low social connectedness, causing crime, alcohol abuse, a lot of other kinds of ills in our society. And some of the people that are most vulnerable to social isolation include newcomers, Indigenous people, low-income people, who are homeless. And so I think we need to be building a kind of community where we build in more social cohesion. And I also want to address the systemic racism that's built into every major institution in our society, from schools, universities, hospitals, courts, and of course the police. And when we just look at incarceration rates, and one example is Indigenous people make up about 5% of the Canadian population, but more than 30% of the federal inmate population is Indigenous. And Indigenous women make up 42% of females incarcerated. So it's way out of proportion, and that shows that racism. We need to find ways of addressing these fundamental issues in a much different way. And an excellent start, as the motion outlines, is to find we need to find new ways rooted in social justice, equality, and community solidarity to create a city that is truly livable for all. So the motion that Councillor Swanson put forward talks about engaging people, talking to people, organizations, groups in our community who deal with those who are most vulnerable. She names some of those groups in the motion. Let's engage with them, ask them, listen to them about what would, help in terms of harm reduction, community safety. What do they need? So in conclusion, I just want to say that let's be guided by the interests of all of us, not just those who wield more influence and power.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us and to express your feelings on this issue. Very much appreciated. Which moves us on to council, and there are no questions to you. To speaker 78, Christian Pollock.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Go ahead.
Great. I'm a settler resident of so-called Vancouver on the stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I'm calling to voice my strong support for Councillor Swanson's motion. Since its inception, one of the primary functions of the Vancouver Police has been to preserve inequality in our city. There are many examples of this, from violently suppressing workers fighting for livable wages in the early 20th century, to beating those fighting for an end to the drug war in Gastown in 1971, to today, where we see VPD raiding Namigan's Tent City 2.0 at Crab Park, raiding the Stewart Squat at Strathcona Elementary, in these cases, taking the most basic forms of shelter away from the most vulnerable people in our city. And I think this pattern makes it evident that they're not here to protect everyday people. And I'll just say quickly as an aside, I witnessed the raid and arrest of those at Crab Park. And that was a truly shameful day for the VPD and our whole city. What does it say about the state of our society when we take away the most basic human need from those who have no other options, while at the same time our city in particular is having such immense wealth? Anyway, I'll to say that the VPD are not here to protect us. Instead, they've shown they prefer to help facilitate the displacement of the poor from gentrified neighborhoods and gentrifying neighborhoods. They prefer to protect statues symbolizing violence against Indigenous women and to protect empty parking lots. There is more than just anecdotal evidence to support this, though. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, the final report, and Red Women Rising both lay out countless failures of the VPD to keep women, specifically Indigenous women, safe. Not only this, actually, they give many examples of the VPD endangering their lives and inflicting violence upon them. And the result is a completely justified and valid mistrust of the VPD. In Red Women Rising, for example, they have this Downtown Eastside Women's Safety Audit that said that 15% of women said they would go to the police if they felt unsafe. And just some of the things these women experience at the hands of the VPD include use of police dogs, escalation during a mental health crisis, which we've heard a lot of in previous speakers, extortion of information, forceful entry into homes, and catch and release as a form of intimidation. I could go on, but I'd encourage you, obviously, to all have it already. Any true safety in our community comes from everyday people. We keep us safe. Initiatives like Insight, for example, that truly do promote community safety, came after years and years and years of activist work in spite of resistance by the VPD. And in fact, as some people have mentioned already, they continue to undermine it by harassing people in front of it and keeping them from getting this service that literally prevents their overdosing and death. So it's these kinds of peer-led community-based initiatives like Insight that we need. It's what the research shows. It's what people's stories tell us. And I think Councillor Swanson has listed a number of great organizations in the motion. They're doing exactly that, and will get us started on the right track. Just to quote one last thing from Red Women Rising, and this is a quote from a woman speaking specifically to the need for decolonized safety systems instead of policing. She says, quote, "We need to go back to our traditional laws instead of these policing courts. We need circles where the community comes together to restore balance and well-being. This colonial system doesn't work for anybody and definitely not for our people." Council, it's your job to keep all residents safe, and that does include the poor, that includes Indigenous people, that includes the Black community, the trans community, sex workers, and particularly all those who've been repeatedly criminalized by the VPD since its inception. And, given this obligation, I don't think you'd have any choice but to support this motion, which, as many people have said, is just the start. And just lastly, we can't train our way out of this. We can't reform our way out of this. The VPD as an institution, from its basic foundations, does not keep us safe. Communities do, and peers do. And that's where our money has to go. Thank you.
And thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Thank you. Council, we would have time right now for only one more speaker, as we have to reconvene in council to ratify the decisions we've made, and we have to do that before this meeting ends at 5. So Speaker 79, Wolf Cup, is not on the line. My understanding is Speaker 80 is Rebecca Keeble, and I think that she can be our last speaker before we break. But I'll hear from the clerk when we will reconvene so that speakers will know that. But go ahead, Speaker 80, Rebecca Keeble.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. My name is Rebecca Keeble, and I'm a resident of Vancouver. I'm speaking today to voice my support for Motion B3. I'd like to thank the Council for the opportunity to speak directly to you today and thank all the speakers before me for their informed comments. I just want to begin by quoting former VPD Superintendent Daryl Wiebe, who prepared the Vancouver Police mental health strategy for the VPD in July of 2016. So in this report, he quotes Section 28 of the Mental Health Act and explains when and why a police officer might have to apprehend a person who's identified as having a mental illness. He then goes on to say, this section of the Mental Health Act allows for considerable police discretion as it provides the police officer with the authority to apprehend. However, with the wording may apprehend, the police officer has the ability to pursue a number of other courses of action, depending on the circumstances involved. History has shown that police interactions with persons living with mental illness and who are in crisis sometimes have the potential for violence. Occasionally, the mere presence of the police can elevate the tenor of the interactions and complicate communication further. It really seems to me like we can remove the middleman from this equation, the police officer, who may apprehend the person with a mental illness and transport them to a secondary location and specialist. Why do the police have to be involved when Wiebe himself acknowledges that, and I quote, the mere presence of the police can elevate the tenor of the interactions and complicate communication further? These words are coming directly from a VPD superintendent. Why don't we have a robust system that would place a nurse or another health professional on the scene? Someone that wouldn't elevate the situation by their mere presence and who might be better prepared by virtue of their specialized professional training to respond to a mental health crisis. A Vancouver Sun article from June quotes Adam Palmer, chief of the VPD. He says, there's no reason to call a cop when you could have somebody come that is a mental health professional. Palmer also said that Vancouver police have been calling for more public funding for mental health, addictions, and homelessness for years. If this is true, then why did the police board refuse any suggestion of a budget cut? A mere 1% cut proposed this year in March was decried and rejected by the VPD and police board. If the VPD is interested in public funding for mental health, addictions, and homelessness, maybe some of that money can come from the embarrassingly inflated police budget. Even police officials themselves think that less policing of mental health and social issues would improve the well-being of our community. So why are these issues still under police jurisdiction? Asking the VPD to itemize their spending is a key way to collect evidence-based data about how this money could be better spent. The VPD needs to know that it's Vancouver City Council's priority to respond to mental health, sex work, homelessness, and substance use with community-led initiatives rather than policing. Instead of increasing the presence of a militarized police force in our city, we need to funnel the money into community services, which currently, along with arts and culture, account for only 5% of the city budget, all while the police get 21% of the budget. I support Black Lives Matter Vancouver and their calls for reform. Specifically, the City of Vancouver must redirect financial resources from the VPD towards initiatives that demonstrably support long-term community safety. This includes childcare support, education, comprehensive mental health intervention and social support, local restorative justice services, employment programs, access to rec facilities, community-directed public investment, peer-based programming, culturally led policies, and more. I ask the Council to show their support for Motion B3 to begin investigating the work that the VPD does with mental health, homelessness, drug use, and sex work, and to try to prioritize community-led harm reduction and safety initiatives that support marginalized communities. That's all. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. And there are no questions to you. Very much appreciate you coming to speak to us on this issue. So, Council, we are at the end of the time that we have available today. And so I've sought some direction before I turn the chair over to the mayor to reconvene us in council to ratify the decision today. I've received some information from the city clerk that the time we should be reconvening is from 1 till 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. So I am moving to recess until 1 p.m. tomorrow.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any discussion? So, Madam Clerk, I don't think I need a vote on this. It's just this is the schedule, right?
We need a vote to recess. That's correct.
A vote to recess? Okay, could I have a vote? You moved the vote to recess and to reconvene at 1 o'clock until 5 o'clock tomorrow, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see anyone on the line to talk to this, so I'll just ask for a verbal vote. Those in favor say aye.
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 Yeah, opposed say nay. Oh, that carries unanimously. Okay, so all the speakers are aware of that now too, which is great. And well done, Council. It was a long session, but we got through a number of speakers in a very informed session. We are on dinner break, and we
not quite
after this. Yes. Okay, you can announce the dinner break, Mr. Mayor. Over to you for Council.
Hey, Chair Carr, I just want to thank you for an exceptional job today. I think it's thanks very much for steering us through some difficult conversations. So we're now going to reconvene in council to deal with recommendations from the Standing Committee on Policy and Strategic Priorities. This is under the Ministerial Act of M139, and this is all live streamed. So can we have the roll call, please, Clerk?
Mayor Stewart is in the chair. Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor De Genova. Councillor Fry.
Here.
Councillor Swanson. I see Councillor Swanson. Councillor Hardwick.
Present.
Councillor Wiebe.
Present.
Councillor Boyle.
Present.
Councillor Dominato. Councillor Bly.
Present.
Councillor Corbillon. You have quorum, Mayor Stewart.
Thanks very much. So we need to adopt the motion. Sorry, we need a motion to adopt the Standing Committee's recommendations from today. Do we have that motion?
So moved.
Seconder Wiebe.
Okay. Councillor Hardwick, second by Councillor Wiebe. We'll do yeas and nays. All in favor say yay.
Yay.
Opposed say nay. Thanks very much. That's carried unanimously. We now move to urgent business, which is for Councillor Hardwick requesting a leave of absence for the meeting on Friday, July 24th from 5 p.m. onwards. Councillor Bly for personal reasons for the meeting on Thursday, July 23rd from 1 to 2. That's retroactive. Would somebody like to move this motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Wiebe. Seconder?
Second, Boyle.
Councillor Boyle, thank you. Yeas and nays. All in favor say yay.
Yay.
All opposed say nay. Okay, thanks. That's passed unanimously. Clerks, adjourn or recess?
We need to recess, please.
Great. A motion to recess then, please.
Hardwick recess.
Thank you. Councillor Hardwick, seconded by Councillor Carr. All those in favor say yay.
Yay.
Opposed say nay. Thanks very much. And clerks, we're recessed until the regular council meeting. When is our next meeting? We have a public hearing tonight from 6 to 10, and then we reconvene tomorrow morning at 9:30 for regular council. Is that correct,
For
Liz?
council, that's correct. And standing committee
Okay.
will start at 1.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much, council, and we'll see you back here at 6 o'clock.
Thank you.